But that's not what it means. You all know that. Capital is just a way to fund loans and investments and risky activities in a way that can absorb losses if things go south. It means shareholders and investors are on the hook, not taxpayers. And what those glossy ads don't tell you is that your banks have been reducing your lending to small businesses and veterans and home buyers for years now, long before the new capital requirements were proposed. Remember that. These are proposals at this point. They haven't even been implemented. Be clear, absolutely nothing in these rules would stop your banks from making loans to working families, to veterans, to homeowners, to small businesses. Absolutely nothing. The reason banks might make fewer of these good loans in the future is the same reason we've been seeing less and less productive banking activity for years. It doesn't make your banks as much money as the risky stuff. You know that. We all know that. You'd rather fund risky trading and derivatives bets than boring bread and butter small business lending. So even with this rule, you can still lend to small businesses and homeowners. You just might not increase your profits quarter over quarter by quite as much as you increased them last year. But I think most Americans would agree that that's a fair trade-off for society. More small business lending, more first-time home buyers, less chance of taxpayer bank bailouts. In exchange, maybe smaller executive bonuses and a teeny tiny bit less profit for multi-trillion-dollar Wall Street banks. We know the banking industry doesn't give up without a well-funded fight. Wall Street pours money into high-priced lobbyists to fight any effort to put the most basic guard rules on your ability to do whatever you want. What your banks want is to maximize quarterly profits. We understand that. The cost to everything and everyone else be damned. We've seen over and over what a problem that is and the harm that the current system does in places like Ohio. Earlier this year, when I first heard about SVB's collapse, my mind immediately went to another crisis in my state in East Palestine, Ohio, the place where the train derailment happened and affected dramatically a community in my state. They have one thing in common. Corporate lobbyists for years push for weaker rules, less oversight. Companies cut costs. They don't care about safety if it gets in the way of increasing profits. Working people always working people pay the price. That's why people hate Wall Street. That's why people hate Washington, because these lobbying campaigns that you've engaged in usually work. We see it over and over. We saw it during the fight to pass Dodd-Frank after the financial crisis. Many of us remember the quote from an industry lobbyist after the president signed Dodd-Frank. Now it's halftime. This time, Wall Street was true to its word. The executives whose banks failed this spring had lobbied for watered-down rules to make it easier to chase profits at all costs. They knew risks were building at their banks, but they chose to ignore those risks because it meant a bigger payout for executives at the top. So we should be concerned when the executives of even bigger banks are doing the same thing against capital requirements. Working Americans are tired of arrogant executives gambling with other people's money, then riding off in the sunset without any consequences. That's why we need to pass the Bipartisan Recoup Act. Thank you, Senator Scott, for your work on that, to hold failed bank executives accountable for driving their banks into the ground. It's why we need strong capital rules. Before your protest, I know, of course, that it wasn't your banks, the 8 of you, that failed. But after those failures earlier this year, we were reminded about how fragile our banking system could be. And as a result, your banks only got even more powerful. So it's fair to take stock of how you're using that power. I appreciate the long overdue increases in wages and benefits for many of your frontline employees. Thank you for that. At least one of your banks has made real efforts to get rid of overdraft fees. Thank you for that. But your banks need to do far better when it comes to meeting customers where they are in recognizing their dignity of work, your employees and your customers. You should be cutting prices for consumers, increasing opportunities for your employees, increasing diversity with your executive ranks, supporting your workers' efforts, if they so choose, to unionize. And you should stop pouring money into lobbying against efforts to protect taxpayers who in the end subsidize your entire industry. The reason for this hearing every year is to hold the biggest banks accountable to the American public. I thanked each of you for being here a moment ago. Personally, I appreciate you're all coming together for this hearing. We want to hear from you. What will you do to support workers, to invest in the real economy, to finally put Wall Street to work for Main Street? Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to a very long list of CEOs who've come to talk with us about how the impacts of our regulatory environment will impact everyday consumers. And I hope that you all, Some of the things I will say will be redundant because some of
Hi,
it's
Algo
unfair based on
Tickler.
what the
Good
chairman just said.
morning.
But I hope you all will
So
really
you got
answer
your
the
vest
question.
on. Congratulations.
Nothing
Good.
in these
Came
proposals will
prepared.
stop your banks from lending to small businesses or first-time home
Oh my
buyers.
God, I always forget he's
Because
a
if
senator.
the proposals Basel III endgame,
Like, what's Rick Scott
who in
doing
America
here?
knows what Basel III endgame really is?
Or Tim
Let's
Scott.
translate that for the average
Oops,
American
see,
sitting
I
at home
confuse
watching
them all
this
the time.
because they have nothing else on TV to watch. It is simply requiring more capital on the sidelines, which then means fewer dollars to lend to small businesses, first-time home buyers,
Really?
car loans.
Is that
So
what it
the
really
actual
means,
impact of
Tim?
a higher regulatory
Or does it
standard
mean like
is fewer dollars to
less
lend to
bonuses,
Americans who need
less
desperately to be
multi-million
engaged in the
dollar
process of achieving the
salaries?
American dream
CEO
that is
salaries are
typically
crazy.
defined
They
by
need to be
having
regulated. I'm
access to
sorry. I'm
capital.
not sorry.
Oh, if you work really hard, keep your
You know what? The
life in
CEOs
order,
don't
you can
generally.
have
I
a
know
good,
CEOs.
quality, middle-class life.
I've
But
worked
if you
in
want to
C-suite.
actually experience wealth in America, you have to experience the benefits
They're
of
not worth
profit
the money.
or
Okay.
equity.
I can
Equity comes
guarantee
from
you.
having capital. Having capital typically means you either have it because you are born with it or you have access to
I
it because you have
guarantee.
an idea or a vision that will make your community or this nation better. When that happens, you go to a lending facility, call a bank or outside the market, and you find that capital that allows you to start your business. And as you start your business and it appreciates it, it creates a profit, and that profit allows you to experience the upper echelon of the
Coffee is
American dream.
amazing. I just wanna
If
say
you have
that.
a home, you look at the differences
If I
between
could marry
African
coffee, I
Americans
probably
and
would.
majority population and net
Because it
worth,
never lets me down. And it's
tenfold
always there
difference.
for me. And it
Much of
just
that
gives me a
difference
big
is
hug.
found
No
in the
words.
profit or the equity
Just
in a
hugs.
home. So when we think about the
Just hugs and
proposals, not of
satisfaction.
good regulation, but of a
I mean,
nightmare
that's really
proposal
what
called
anyone
Basel
wants
III
in a
Endgame
marriage.
that would put so much more capital
I'm
on the
gonna marry my
sidelines, we should
coffee.
ask ourselves, how does that translate for the average American living
It's just the
and
best.
working paycheck to paycheck? My thought
It'll
is
be a June
it
wedding.
has a devastating impact to access to capital that makes the American dream harder to achieve.
I want to
and
get married
access
again
to
so I can
capital
live stream it.
for some folks who started where I started, virtually impossible. I think if you think about today's hearing from my perspective, I want to talk about three things. Number one is certainly Basel III, the end game. Number two is the burdensome
I'm in a very
regulations and
silly mood
guidance that will
today,
ultimately
and
hamper
I'm in
consumer
I'm
choice.
in
And number
I got
three,
this
the
hoodie
job our
at
regulators
Comic-Con
are doing, or
from
frankly
this
should be
comic book.
doing,
It was the
and
only thing I
and the
bought.
workplaces our regulators cultivate.
And it says Dope
I'll
Cat.
start as I
Dope
just did with
Cat
Basel III, the end game.
Comics.
The
I'll
fact
have
of the
to.
matter
I'm not going
is
to come on
that
camera this morning.
this one proposal
I'll come
could
on.
have a devastating impact on small
But it's
businesses.
a
And I
hoodie
would
day.
like for you all to
It's a
address that
snuggly
either now or
sweatshirt
during the
day.
questions. Last month, I led a letter to the FDIC,
Let me try.
Fed, and OCC calling on them to withdraw this
It is-
misguided proposal because American families, the folks who will bear the burden of this burdensome regulations, simply
Oh, that's a good idea.
can't
Free
afford it.
drinks. I
The
should
letter was
just wear a
signed by nearly
dress.
80% of my
equally.
Republican colleagues that really spanned the
I'm gonna live
entire
stream a
ideological
stranger's wedding
spectrum
in
of
a
the
wedding
country.
dress.
Nearly every single person who signed the letter
I don't want the
did so
drinks.
because
I
they
want
all
the food.
agreed that costly, harmful impacts on our constituents, our businesses, and their
Mm,
families is something
kidding.
that could be avoided if
Kidding.
simply the banking regulators would listen to common sense
Kidding.
and withdraw the
Serious.
proposal. And frankly, last month when the regulators spoke, even some of my Democrat colleagues
Here we go.
agreed with our concerns on the negative impacts brought to us by a burdensome regulatory environment.
Yeah,
Let me be
well,
clear,
see, not all of
this
us have
proposal could limit, and
bananas to
frankly,
peel
I
with our
think
feet
will
all
limit the
day,
following.
okay? Some of us have to
Availability
worry
of
about what
credit
our
for
hair looks
housing
like.
for those who need it most, severely restrict lending for small businesses that are still rebounding from the pandemic, and cut into the retirement savings for hardworking Americans like teachers, police officers, firefighters, when they're dealing with higher prices and runaway inflation brought by the radical left. These are very, very serious and real concerns. But Americans shouldn't just hear about the concerns from those of us who are senators. We should hear from those who actually run the institutions that they have entrusted and have confidence in. As a former business owner myself, I believe that you all as the day-to-day operators of these businesses, not elected officials, have a better sense of what the communities are facing, the challenges
I
brought
don't think you
upon
have a good sense of what your
communities by
community
these
is
higher
facing.
standards.
I'm going to be honest, Tim. I'd like
Vice Chair
to-
Barr last month said that the new Basel Endgame will only impact about 40 of the banks in our country. Said differently, 2/3 of all the loans processed will be negatively impacted by the Endgame proposal. That's $60 billion in small business loans in 2021, $250 billion negatively impacted. And the definition of negative, higher interest rates or fewer loans in 2022. In my home state of South Carolina, that translates into $550 million of small businesses having higher interest rates or fewer loans, and $3 billion in 2022 in home mortgage originations. If regulations continue to increase the costs of providing a loan, I fear that banks will decrease lending, not only in my home state, but across the country. Decreased lending means increased financial hardship, and increased financial hardship means a reduction in opportunity. That's my ultimate concern, reducing opportunity for everyday Americans. At the end of the day, these consequences will create a ceiling for low-income Americans, and it won't be a ceiling made of glass. Instead, it will be made of concrete. We simply
You will
can't
need
let that happen.
a
The second item I want to
thingamajobber,
discuss with you all today
those
concerns the
things
onslaught of rules
that-
and proposals targeting your
those
institutions
things that,
and the banking system writ large. For instance, in recent months,
Oh,
we've seen
man.
proposals
Oh,
or
here we
final
go. Easily.
rules all the way from
Talk
climate
to the
risk
guests, interview their
management
families,
to the
act like you were
Community
hired, and then
Reinvestment
leave.
Act.
That,
None of these proposals exist in a vacuum. And it
easily
is vital that this committee hear from each of you about
I
the
might
overall
do
impact
something
on
like-
the
I mean, I
health
don't
of our
know
economy.
someone's
In
part,
particular, I'm deeply concerned by the continued
like
partisan
that. I
attempts
kinda
of
like
this
the
administration to advance this
interview
their
the
climate
families.
goals
Well,
by
no, I
any
guess that's not
means
fair. You can't
possible,
put them on live
including through our
Never mind.
banking
I'm not going to
system
break the law
with the
or
recent climate
ruin
risk
anybody's
management
big day. That's for
guidance.
sure.
Banks have
I
been
would never
considering
do that.
weather risks for decades,
But it's an interesting
and you
idea.
should. It's called common sense.
I like the
And it remains incumbent
beauty
upon each of you
of
to base your
interviewing
lending
wedding
decisions
guests.
on risks
That, I think,
you
would
can
be really
reasonably
beautiful.
assess, like weather
Or
or
Christmas.
credit risk.
Okay, this might
Not,
be actually better.
however, perceived political, rhetorical, or reputational
Oh, I don't know
risk
if you could do it because
beyond the explicit
corporations
cost
have
of these
such, like,
proposals, which
big
ultimately
security.
are passed
if
on to
I
consumers. I fear that the
could
only real
dress,
accomplishments of the
in
regulators
corporate, because I
will
think
be
I
to
have, I
push
have a
more
suit.
activity
I have a suit.
outside of the
a
regulated
black
financial system, where we
put
have
on a
less
suit
insight
and
into
go
the
to a
impacts
Christmas
on
party
consumers.
and act like I'm an employee.
And
Or
finally,
maybe
number
I could
three,
just act like,
we must
hey, yeah,
emphasize and
somebody asked
turn
me to
our
film it,
attention
so I'm just
to
interviewing
the performance
or
of our
live
regulators
streaming
and
or
their core
whatever. I don't
mission,
know.
the supervision
Maybe not.
of your banks,
I just
and
don't
the
want to film
stability
people without their
of our
knowledge.
financial economy.
Or
This
like
past
some
spring,
people,
we saw the
go to an
failures
Ivan
of
Raiklin
several
speech.
banks,
Does he
which
speak out in
shook
California?
consumer
Because I would.
confidence. Since then, there's been
I don't think
nonstop
I've seen
finger
him
pointing
come
by
this
our
far
regulators.
west.
In the aftermath of the
in
failures, I was
ever.
critical of the failed bank
I don't think
executives
I've ever
because
seen him
that's where the
travel
dollar
outside of
should
the
stop.
eastern
The buck
seaboard.
stops with the executives. But you can't see that in a vacuum. You have to ask yourself the question,
Yeah, I gotta
what
find
was the role of the
someone.
regulators?
Ask them
What did they do? What did they
That's a
see?
great idea.
Well, how did they respond to that?
That's a great idea.
Your institutions have teams of
I
examiners
love it.
from the regulatory agencies in your offices every day. And I can tell by your faces, you're really
It's
excited to
territory
see them when they show up.
control.
But the truth is
Oh, yeah.
that we, the American people, deserve to understand the complexity of the web that exists that makes the headwinds real for lending money to would-be entrepreneurs
has
or
he
first-time
been on
home
there?
buyers.
I'm trying to think if I've seen.
Let me close with this.
I don't even think I've seen Doug.
We're not on the
Green.
same page on a lot of
Any of those
issues.
in the
I
line.
think there are times when banks go too far in getting involved in politics. But when it comes to your objective of creating access to credit, to resources for the American
They act like
people
it's some
and the
perfect
American dream,
that the financial
That's where
services
I
industry
hope we
is
find
so
our
dedicated to
attention today.
serving.
Focused on an environment
It's not.
that is either easier for the average
It's not.
American to experience the American dream, or it's made harder because of the challenges brought to them by this government.
Thanks, Senator Scott. I'd like to introduce our 8 witnesses, and then I'm going to ask you each to
Sorry, I
stand and
screwed
raise
up
your
on
right
the
hand,
title,
swear you in.
everybody.
Charles Scharf,
Hi, when
CEO
I
and President of
schedule
Wells
these
Fargo,
things, so I
welcome.
don't know what I'm.
Brian Moynihan, Chair and
Sorry.
CEO of Bank of America, welcome.
I can't edit
Jamie
it.
Dimon, Chair and CEO
I'll
of
edit
JP
it out.
Morgan Chase,
Jamie
welcome.
Dimon.
Jane
Oh,
Fraser, CEO of Citigroup, welcome. Ronald Hanley, CEO of State Street, welcome to you. Robin Vance, CEO of BNY Mellon, thank you for joining us. David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, CEO. James Gorman, CEO of Morgan Stanley. Please stand for a moment and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank
aren't
you.
they not
Take
supposed to
your
say
seat,
so
and
help
Mr.
you God?
Scharf, please begin.
Isn't that no longer part of the?
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to talking with you about the contributions Wells Fargo is making to support our customers, communities, employees, and to ensure the banking system is strong
be a
and
hard one.
resilient.
I'm going to be honest.
In March of this year, we all saw the failure of several banks rapidly create instability in certain parts of the banking sector. Though the causes were specific to the institutions that failed,
Really?
markets became
What about
concerned that
Peter
the
Thiel
issues were
removing all his
broader.
money?
In response, Wells Fargo, along with
How about
other
that?
banks here today,
Are we gonna
stood
talk
as a
about
source
that?
of strength and stability.
Are we going to talk
The
about
strength of our
how Peter Thiel
institution
pulled
allowed
his
us to
money
lend
out?
support to a smaller bank in a time of need.
So help you.
These actions help stabilize the banking system, ease consumer concerns,
So help you, Stay Puft
and keep
Marshmallow
the
Man.
challenge from becoming a much broader crisis. I'm proud of the role we were able to
Are
play.
you proud? Are
Wells
you?
Fargo's strength
Oh,
comes
you just
from a
picked up
strong
those-
financial
Those little
profile,
banking
disciplined
customers,
financial
like a
risk
hero?
management,
Is
and a
that it?
commitment to run our business
fucking
with
hero?
high standards. Our top priority continues to be building and running a well-controlled
Are you a
company.
Really?
Over the past 4
That's
years, we have
solid.
simplified our
I'm going to
business
tell you
model
right now, I
and
hate
have
these guys.
exited or downsized several
the rich.
businesses. We are primarily a
Banks
U.S.
CEOs
domestic
are
bank, and we
Horrible.
do not have many complexities that
Horrible.
running large-scale international businesses brings. Our legal entity structure and physical footprint are far simpler than many of our competitors. Approximately 90% of our revenues come from the United States. We proudly serve 1 in 3 U.S. households and more than 10% of small businesses in the U.S. We are a leading middle market banking provider here. We maintain one of the largest branch networks in the nation, and we have more rural branches than any other large bank. Nearly 30% of our branches are in low or moderate income census tracts. We are constantly improving how we serve our customers in our communities. We're investing in our branches. We're building digital capabilities to complement our physical presence, and we are investing in the products we offer to our customers. Since 2019, we have taken numerous steps to reduce and simplify fees, which as of year-end 22 have resulted in average consumer deposit account paying approximately 25% less in fees per year. We give customers the choice of an account that offers overdraft protection or one that is not subject to overdraft fees. We eliminated non-sufficient fund fees and transfer fees for customers enrolled in overdraft protection.
Wait, that's a real
We
picture
introduced early payday,
of
which makes
Kyle
eligible
Rittenhouse? That's a
direct
real
deposits
picture of Kyle
available up to
Rittenhouse?
2 days early. Extra day grace, which gives eligible customers
Hi,
an
Good
additional
morning.
business day to
Came on
make
a little
deposits to avoid overdraft fees. And Flex
I
Loan,
guess
a
I'm
new digital-only
I'm
small
on
dollar
time
loan.
now.
I'm also proud of the role we play in our communities, where we seek to have broad impact. Last year, people who work at Wells Fargo contributed over 700,000
that
hours
business
of
was
volunteer
doing well.
service. I've spoken in the past of our decision to take the $420 million in fees we received from administering the PPP program and donating them through local partners to small businesses in need.
Oh
Through the first half of 2023, these funds have helped support
didn't
more than
profit off the
203,000 small
pandemic.
businesses,
What
the
you did.
majority of them diverse-owned, and helped preserve or create nearly
Norman
254,000
Lear
jobs.
died. Oh,
Finally, we
no.
believe our employees are our greatest asset.
Oh,
We
Norman Lear
invest in
died.
them and we listen to
He was
them.
101.
Since 2019, we have
101.
increased wages for U.S. hourly employees by nearly 20% and increased the average pay rate for tellers by 34%.
What an amazing
In
comedian.
2022, we
Jesus
increased
Christ.
the minimum base pay for more than 40,000 employees, and we invested an additional $200 million in employee
Fucking
development.
Groundbreaking. How much
We have several ways for employees to share ideas or voice
drugs having a
concerns.
sale on those?
Their voice matters. We take their feedback seriously, and we act on their comments. For example, in our consumer bank, approximately
It's fucking
4,000
plastic.
improvement ideas that our employees have
Plastic's not
submitted this year have been
fantastic.
implemented or are in the process for future
Hashtag.
implementation. Engaging directly with our employees in this way is critical to improving the work experience at Wells Fargo. I want to close by thanking our employees. Their dedication is unmatched. I'm thankful for all that they do,
the
and I
fuck
remain
up,
committed to leading
fucking asshole.
Wells Fargo to be one of the most
I'm gonna
respected
change my
financial
name.
institutions
What
in
am I
the country.
changing?
Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moynihan. Welcome.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members.
It's
of the committee,
hoodie day.
Good morning.
I'm
I'm here
changing
once again
it.
to proudly represent my 212,000.
Everybody
plus
just get the
Bank of America
comfiest hoodie
teammates.
you can
Today,
and
I'll
put
provide
it
an
on.
update
I mean,
from
if
last
you.
year and how we deliver responsible growth for our clients, our teammates, our communities, and shareholders every day.
Brian.
Responsible growth continues to deliver strong results during times of relative calm,
China
as well
has
as during challenging
fallen.
environments like we experienced earlier this year. We saw market turbulence as a limited number of financial institutions face challenges due to their unique business models. Bank of America, as we did during the pandemic,
China, like
along
the
with my
wrestler.
colleague companies, served as
She
a source
seems
of
to
strength
know.
and stability for our industry and for our customers during these times.
That's weird.
And we did this all while continuing to strengthen our balance sheet. As a G-SIB, we are subject to the highest capital and liquidity requirements, and all of our metrics exceed those requirements. And while we have declared that we have the
It's
capital
just
today
like
to
a
meet the
van
proposed
to
new
live in
capital rules,
cost.
we remind you that in recent years, including this
I'm thinking
one,
of
have
van
shown
life.
just how important it is to have these institutions be able to position their balance sheets
I've been
to
watching
help
too many
customers and
shows.
clients in times of stress. That's why we continue
Sorry,
to play an
too much
active
weed.
role to help inform the future of this industry, including
Oh.
comments on proposed Basel III capital rules.
Oh,
We
that's
believe the
great,
capital
Inslee.
accumulated by the industry
Oh, that's not
should
the one
continue to
I
serve
meant,
the
but okay.
customers and America's economy, not be subject
Whatever.
to regulatory capture by
Oh
a
my God,
theoretical
I just
model.
can't. I can't
The
get away.
$30 billion in excess today at Bank of America should be used to grow the U.S. economy, to support the business plan of small business and medium-sized businesses, to help consumers buy a home and recognize the American dream. And now for a few specific examples of progress on responsible growth. At Bank of America, we serve 60 million American consumers, 11 million small business clients, and tens of thousands of
Like,
commercial
share, and
clients.
subscribe.
We continue to focus on delivering expert network and guidance
I know,
across our
right?
high-touch physical network. We ended the year with 3,900 financial centers and 15,500 ATMs. We opened 58 new financial centers last year and renovated 784 more of them. In addition to these branches, we have tens of thousands of teammates and serving over 100 local markets around the country. Over the next 4 years, we're expanding to Omaha, Louisville, Boise, Birmingham, Madison, New Orleans, Milwaukee, Dayton, and Huntsville. This will enable us to bring our full range of services and solutions to better serve clients and help drive local community
Yeah.
growth and development.
It's time to.
We also deployed our strength to low and moderate income customers, including approximately $9 billion in LMI loans to small businesses in 2022. In addition, we provided nearly $8 billion in debt and equity financing, creating more than 10,000 units of affordable housing. And we've committed $15 billion to our affordable home ownership program. That will help 60,000 American families purchase a home to ensure the American dream. Over the last few years, we've also invested in 24 minority deposit institutions. We have $2 billion outstanding to CDFIs. We've helped seed more than 150 private equity funds run by women and diverse private equity entrepreneurs. Our clients also continue to look to us to help them achieve a transition to a secure, low-carbon economy. With tens of trillions of dollars in investment needed over the next 30 years, this transition creates significant opportunities for our clients and for our company. This transition has to be led by the private sector, or it simply is not going to happen. Within our company, we continue to invest in our teammates' physical, emotional, and financial health. This includes taking steps to continue to move to our $25 U.S. minimum wage hourly wage pledge, which we increased to $23 in October. And for the 12th year in a row, U.S. teammates earning less than $50,000 annually will not see any increase in medical
Be
premiums.
part of the
For the 6th year in a row, our teammates
cottage industry.
received special sharing success bonus, generating equity ownership to over
Thanks, I'll
200,000
go
teammates.
tickler.
We're a great place to work, as recognized by external parties and by our teammates. Our employee satisfaction scores remain at all-time highs, and our turnover rate is approaching an all-time low. Responsible growth also means supporting the communities where we live and work. In 2022, we made $360 million in
No, I'm gonna
philanthropic
scoff at them
investments.
this
Our
entire
teammates
fucking
reported
thing.
nearly 2 million volunteer hours for the year. We also create opportunity in our communities through employment. We're in the second leg of a 10,000 teammate hiring. That's 20,000 total from low and moderate income communities to work in our company. Similarly, we've hired over 15,000 veterans in the last 8 years. And importantly, responsible growth delivers for our shareholders. We have delivered strong earnings and strong returns. We continue to increase our common dividend, and we continue to return capital to shareholders. This is driving responsible growth. This is American capitalism at work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moynihan. Mr. Diamond, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about JP Chase and the role of America's largest banks in supporting our economy. The United States has the best financial system in the world, where retail banks, investment banks, asset managers, investors, hedge funds, and non-banks serve the American economy. The country benefits from thousands of banks and credit unions of all sizes, covering all corners of our country. I'm very proud of this company and of the more than 300,000 employees worldwide. In the U.S., we serve more than 80 million customers,
Wow,
6
there's
million
like
small businesses.
Converted
We have more
van,
than
like
4,800
already
branches now
for like
in 48 states,
60,000.
almost all of your states here, and Washington, D.C., which puts
And
the
it's in
Chase branch within a
2017.
10-minute drive
That's
to
not bad.
60% of the population. We are a top lender in every rural state, serving medium and large companies, local governments, hospitals, universities, farms, and manufacturers, providing almost $100 billion of credit and capital to clients in rural and small towns. JP Chase extended in total $1.7 trillion in credit to consumers and corporations in 2023. We moved $10 trillion around the world every day in 120 currencies and 160 countries daily, and we safeguard more than $29 trillion in assets. The country benefits from thousands of banks and credit unions of all sizes serving all corners, and we must acknowledge that there are some things that can only be done by large and complex banks, things that are essential to a thriving U.S. economy and American competitiveness. While we are a large Main Street bank, large banks in this panel serve America's
that's
interests
how we do.
overseas. We bank America's largest multinational corporations around the world. We bank other banks and financial institutions, such as mortgage finance companies, insurance companies, the World Bank, IMF, community banks, MDIs, CDFIs. Large American banks support the deepest, transparent, and most liquid capital markets in the world. We underwrite large and complex municipal bonds, which provide governments financing for roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and airports. And we help Americans and small businesses manage their money and finance their dreams. Our
Please
collective
share the
work is
broadcast,
important in good times,
if you would,
but
that'd be
essential
great.
in troubled times.
Thank you.
In good times, large banks help America save, invest, and grow. We underwrite stocks and bonds to create investments for retirees and other savers and raise money for companies, fueling job creation and new business development. As guardians of the financial system, we support our government and national security to combat financial crimes and to carry out complex operations. We are a force for good for the country, its citizens, and the global economy. In troubled time, large banks provide market stability to protect customers and employees alike. As demonstrated recently during the spring 2023 regional bank turmoil, large banks stepped in to provide market liquidity, which protected consumers, retirement savers, and employers.
Well,
During
Jesus and
COVID, we
Creeper
also
Chickens
saw
with G
America's large
shared
banks
this
provide
photo. You might
significant
wanna take a
support,
look at that.
extending tens of billions of dollars of credit and capital to struggling large and small
I see what
businesses,
you're trying to
local
do there,
governments,
by the
universities,
way.
and hospitals at a time when they needed it the most. Banks waived hundreds of millions of dollars in fees and postponed loan payments for customers struggling to make ends meet. Despite zero evidence that U.S. banks are undercapitalized today, the proposed Basel III Endgame rule, 10 years in the making, shockingly, if enacted, would increase capital requirements by about 25% for the largest banks. None of these proposed changes, by the way, would have effectively prevented the Silicon Valley bank failure. The rule would have
Why
predictable
don't you
and
ask Peter
harmful
Thiel about
outcomes to
the
the
Silicon
economy,
Valley bank
markets,
failure?
business of all sizes, and
Ask
American
him about
households
how much money
in ways
he
the
took out
Federal
of
Reserve has not
SVB
studied,
before it
contemplated,
announced
or
its,
shared.
run.
Mortgages and small business loans will be more expensive and harder to access, particularly for low to moderate income borrowers, as costs for originating and securitizing loans rise.
Ooh,
Savings
four
for
Russian
retirement or
soldiers have been
college will
charged with
yield
war
lower
crimes
returns
against an
as
American
costs
who was
rise for
living in
asset
Ukraine
managers, money
during the
market
Russian
funds, and
invasion,
pension
according
funds.
to court documents unsealed
Government
in a federal
infrastructure
court in
projects will become
Virginia.
more expensive as capital requirements for market
Nobody's
activities will more than
reported from
double, translating to higher
CNN.
costs to build
Yeah.
hospitals, bridges, and roads. From beverage companies that need to manage aluminum costs to farms that need to protect against environmental risks.
Why?
If the cost of hedging these risks increases,
Maybe.
everything from a can of soda to meat products will be impacted. Ironically,
What is
a proposal meant to mitigate risk will actually increase risk. This rule will result in an increased shift away from regulated markets to less regulated markets, which was not also studied, by the way. And this activity will be out of the sight of regulators,
You can
unable to
also
see
order a
the next
Lolo's
crisis
Lounge
brewing.
hoodie if you would
I
like.
fear that the proposed
on-
now, study later is becoming a troublesome
somewhere,
new theme in
on
Washington.
my links.
There have been a number of consumer-focused products, caps and late fees or interest
I don't
rates,
have a
cuts to
hoodie
debit,
with
interchange, to name a few, where virtually no economic analysis has been performed to determine the individual or collective impact of these rules on consumers, small businesses, lower income families, markets, or the economy.
Friends to me.
The debate should not always be about more or less regulation, about the right regulations to keep America's banking system the best
I
in the
gotta
world.
find some money
I
to go
urge
to that
lawmakers
conference
and
away
regulators
from
to be
America
thoughtful
tour.
about
They
the
keep
effect of
calling me.
arbitrary and unstudied regulatory proposals and their cumulative impact on the economy. Good regulations and good regulators are critical to maintain the strength
Be
of our
like a
banking
dog
system.
walker.
Our nation should give thanks
Live
to Chairman
stream dog
Powell and
walking.
Secretary Yellen for the tremendous work through some complicated economic times, including their work on
guys, no
sanctions
invite.
following Russia's
Play-
invasion of Ukraine and the steps they took during the regional bank turmoil this spring. These are excellent examples of how regulators working with the industry collaboratively,
Really?
sharing information transparently
if I
to
call
protect
him,
the
Gal?
financial system and the country. To close, I'd like to
Call.
speak to my
I forgot
300,000
what name I
employees
gave him.
and actually maybe all bank employees around the world about how I am
Did I
proud
say?
of everything they do every day in hundreds of communities around
Oh,
the
Jenny
world, serving
Justice.
consumers, businesses, large and small, farms, cities, schools, states,
I saw it.
hospitals, around the
Jenny
clock,
Justice.
24/7. Thank you very much for the
Oh
great
yeah,
things
okay,
you
I'll
do for
do
this
it.
country.
I'll do that.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
true.
Ms.
It's
Fraser.
true.
Welcome.
I'm like, I can't afford a $250 for a ticket.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and esteemed
Am I
members of the
right?
committee. Thank you
mean,
for the
I
opportunity
hate the
to
game,
speak to you
not the
this morning.
player.
As CEO, I have the opportunity to lead a 211-year-old institution that supports clients in nearly 160 markets around the world.
Well, right.
And we have 240,000
Yes.
employees,
I
of
forgot.
whom I could not be more
God's
proud to
work.
lead and more grateful to.
Archangel
Through decades
Michael.
of geopolitical shifts and technological advances, we have seen how the US banking system is truly unmatched. The isolated bank failures of the spring may have tested the confidence
Can
of our
we have
people
Peter
in our
Thiel
industry,
comment on that?
but I am proud of how our industry, including my
you.
peers sitting around me today, how we came together
Bankers.
and worked with the
Stop.
government to affirm the
I
underlying
know
strength
you,
and stability
You
of the
forget.
system.
I know you.
As we chart a path forward,
Tell
we
them I
need to
was-
make sure we don't
Oh,
inadvertently
that's it.
upend the
That's
very
it.
system and unique system that we have.
I wonder.
Our financial
I could
system
become
is
a
the
different
envy of
channel.
others
Well,
because
Jenny
it is
Justice will set up
underpinned
a channel.
by the most competitive banking system and the deepest capital
Yes,
markets.
she would a crunchy biscuit.
We're home to banks of all
I bet she has a
sizes,
crunchy
each with an important role to play.
I know. that was
Collectively,
just
our
a
banks
convenient
serve as
joke
the
on her
engines of
part-
growth,
on-
supporting businesses
her,
and
and I
households and
apologize, but
promoting access
it
to
was kind of-
financial services in hard-to-reach communities. For American multinationals, global banks such as ours offer the size and scale to help
That
them
could be
compete
really- I could
overseas
think of a lot of
without
terrible
having to
jokes.
rely on foreign banks. We finance
I
supply
apologize.
chains and partner with American
think I
top
will.
companies to bring products
I
and
think I will.
services to American
I'll try.
consumers
Let's see, it's
at affordable
December 15th, I
prices.
think. What the fuck is it? They
We
just
use
called
our
me.
robust balance sheets to fund transformational projects. Last year alone, Citi worked with state and local governments to raise or finance nearly $31 billion in infrastructure investment. That included financing 35,000 affordable housing units across 32 states. That's our 13th year as the country's #1 affordable housing lender. And in addition, we provide a variety of products to drive financial inclusion and work with CDFIs and
Oh, do
MDIs
you?
to reach
You know,
the underserved.
darling, I have
As a proud
worked with
participant of the
banks
OCC's
and
Project
their
Reach, we are
CEOs,
co-leading the work
etc.,
stream that's
to get
focused on
funding
strengthening
for said
MDIs.
non-profit
And we
work.
are also
And let me
engaged
tell you,
in
you
initiatives to
stingy-ass
increase access
motherfucking
to credit
bitch,
and
it
reduce
is
the number of
absolutely
Americans who
impossible
are credit
to get
invisible.
enough money without spending
The strength of our
too much
financial
money
system becomes
on
most
the
critical when the outlook for
programs
our
and
economy weakens.
fundraising
Although we certainly
that
don't see
you
a drastic
require us to
downturn on
do
the
for
horizon,
the assholes
history suggests that a recession is possible
so
given the
I would
macroeconomic
like
factors
for
at
you
play.
to take several
And they
seats,
include persistent
bitch,
inflation in
and sit down with
services,
all your little
rising
pretty
debt, and a
friends.
slowdown in global growth, as well as
Slow
two
down
major
yourself.
conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. And we're beginning to see
Good.
some
I
concerning
said, okay,
signs
what's
in the
going
lower
on next?
FICO
Well,
score
okay,
segment
Penny
of our
Justice is my name,
customers.
so I can't do
And
a
this is
Lolo
unfortunately the very same
but I
group
could do
that
like
feels any tightening of credit first.
I could do like
Raising capital requirements by as much as
we'll think
20%
about it.
on an
I like
industry that all participants
Oh no, I
believe
know,
is
but
well
there's no, I don't know.
capitalized
Is there any
is a
other
bad
hearing? I
idea
don't even know
in
what hearing
any
it was today. I thought
environment.
that was something else.
But it becomes even more
I
problematic
know how to read.
with economic uncertainty ahead.
Oh, no.
Almost every element of the Basel III Endgame proposal would make lending and other financial activities more expensive, especially for smaller companies and consumers. The most likely result of increasing the cost of banks to offer a variety of products is that it would move more activity into the less regulated non-bank sector, which carries its own risk for consumers and the stability of the financial system. It would also diminish our industry's ability to compete internationally, especially with our European counterparts. I raise these concerns as I know we all share the same goal, that is of maintaining a strong and competitive.
Section 702 by the FBI and broader intelligence community, the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act requires all intelligence agencies and the FBI to obtain a warrant from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court before conducting any query of a U.S. person. It would also drastically reduce the number of FBI officials authorized to conduct such queries. The bill will also bring much-needed reforms to the FISC, increase transparency, and ensure that those who violate the civil liberties of Americans will be held accountable for their actions.
Is that right? Oh,
The
yeah.
bill closes the data broker loophole to ensure the government cannot make an end run around the Fourth
Way
Amendment to
more
purchase
dynamically dumb. That's true.
the data of Americans,
That's
which
true.
was unanimously supported by this committee earlier this year. However, this bill will not restrict the intelligence community from acting quickly in the face of
Well, then
impending
maybe
danger
Russia,
due to its reasonable
oh, it's not the Senate.
exceptions
God
based on the
damn,
exigent
man.
circumstance of each situation.
Why does anybody
Additionally, if
feel like
surveilling an innocent U.S.
so?
person's
Maybe
data
that's
is
the
so
question
vital to
I should
national
be
security,
asking
the
myself.
intelligence
Is
community
why do people
may get the
actually
consent
show
of that
up?
U.S. person that they intend to surveil without
They
needing
want
to
to
get a
defund the
warrant.
police. Oh, cool.
With these exceptions, this bill ensures that the government must have a good reason if it wants to target Americans' data. It is clear that reforms to FISA are desperately needed, and the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act will implement significant reform. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Before recognizing the ranking member, let me again thank the chairman of the crime subcommittee and the sponsor of the legislation, as well as Mr. McClintock and Ms. Lee, who worked on this, who focused on this issue for several months,
Rick.
and our entire
Good morning.
side of the dais, as well as our staff. And I also want to thank ranking member Nat,
Yes.
where
Well, we're in a
we worked
transition, folks. That's what
for
it
a
is.
number of weeks and months on this legislation, and have
Everybody's
had great
figuring
conversations
shit
with
out.
him and our staff and your staff, as well as Ms. Jayapal and others on the committee.
I fell
This
asleep
is
reading the
nice to have the committee work this way from
whatchamacallit.
time to time, particularly on something of this
On
level
the
of importance.
Eastman
And so we
document. I'd
appreciate
kinda
that.
like
With
to go
that, I would
over
yield to
that
the ranking member for
if
opening
if
statement.
we can.
I thank the chairman.
I haven't.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr.
then I lost
Chairman, for
all my
holding this important
annotations.
markup today.
I lost all my
Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act,
all of them.
the Protect Liberty Act,
Great.
is
I
the
love my
product of a
computer.
year-long
I need a
effort
new computer.
in which
I'm
I
going
was proud to
buy-
join Chairman
going to
Jordan and
start
Mr. Biggs
saving.
in leading. Over the past year, the committee held 2 hearings on FISA that helped frame the important issues that called out for reform. We brought in government watchdogs from the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and the DOJ Inspector General, who described the FBI's ongoing compliance issues with Section 702. We heard from witnesses from the civil liberties community about the impact of these violations, and we consulted with a range of experts on what changes were needed to help prevent inappropriate queries of the FISA 702 database. And we engaged with the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the other agencies that use this authority, an exchange that leaves, I suspect, virtually every member of this committee convinced that Section 702 is essential to national security and ought to be reauthorized in some form. This legislation is the product of that exhaustive process. On Monday, Mr. Biggs and I unveiled the Protect Liberty Act,
Well, I need to.
bipartisan
I haven't gotten
legislation that
one.
would
I'm
reauthorize
gonna
and
get
reform
one.
Section 702 and would require robust civil liberties
I need to give
protections
the mic.
throughout the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I anticipate that we will hear that word a lot today, bipartisan.
Hi, Ted.
It is not a word often used to describe our committee. But the process that led to this bill was one of true bipartisanship, one where members on both sides of the aisle sat down together to find common ground. FISA reform will only be successful when we work together, and I thank the chairman for allowing that bipartisan process to play out. Let me take a moment to put my support for this important legislation into context. Like many of my colleagues, I have never supported the bill to reauthorize Section 702 on the House floor. I have in the past worked with my Republican colleagues on this committee to reach a compromise that would place appropriate restraints on the government's use of this
There's
powerful
always
authority.
an angle.
Unfortunately, those thoughtful approaches were never presented to the full House for a vote. Indeed, one wonders if we would
I
even
don't
be having this
know.
debate today if the
You
House
mean
had
in
passed
this
the bipartisan
Congress?
effort that I advanced with former Chairman Bob Goodlatte
Or which one?
back in
Or do you
2017.
mean earlier?
Today in this hearing room, we have an opportunity to put this conversation
They
back on
changed it after
track.
the Carter Page
For
stuff.
too long, FISA has enabled the surveillance of Americans without adequate safeguards to protect our civil liberties. No one disagrees that our intelligence agencies play an essential role in keeping us safe.
I think
But it is
it's finally
unfair
coming home
to
to
expect
roost
that the
with
individuals who
Americans
carry
about
the
all
grave
overt shit
responsibility of
that
rooting
they've
out
done.
terrorist threats
And now
should also
it's
be
like
required to make judgments
you have to
about
balance
how to
that with
protect the constitutional rights of
institutional
those surveilled.
integrity and
They need Congress to enact guardrails. And in Congress, that role falls to the House Judiciary
I
Committee.
say that right, but
Time and again, the FISA court has found that the government overstepped in its use of FISA authorities. Nowhere is this lack of compliance more apparent than in the case of FBI querying of U.S. person information contained in the 702
I badger.
database. Although Section 702 authorizes only the targeting of non-U.S. persons who are
Proposed.
outside the United States,
Too. I know they.
we know that massive amounts of U.S. person data are
Interesting.
swept up under this
Rubio.
programmatic surveillance. We also know from what reporting is available that the government has a lot of this data, and that much of it could not have been obtained without a warrant had they tried to collect it directly. And even though there are some constraints in when the FBI can query U.S. person identifiers, those protections do not necessarily work. For example, restrictions on FBI queries did not prevent searches of over 100 Black Lives Matter protesters. They did not prevent a batch query of over 19,000 donors to an unnamed congressional candidate. And they did not stop over 278,000 other non-compliant FBI queries of the 702 database that occurred just last year. 278,000. The single most important reform we can put in place to combat these abuses
Is a
is a
password.
warrant requirement for U.S. person queries. This legislation will do just that. Legislation before us today would impose a probable cause warrant requirement on searches using U.S. person identifiers with certain reasonable exceptions such as cybersecurity cases and in exigent circumstances. It would also significantly limit the number of FBI personnel who can conduct U.S. person queries, increase the types of cases where an amicus must be appointed at the FISA court, and impose much-needed additional transparency to the entire system. Although I expect this bill to pass today with overwhelming bipartisan consensus, I know our approach will have its critics. Some will say we have gone too far towards reform. Some will say we have not done nearly enough. And some will attempt to convince us that a mostly symbolic warrant requirement, one that exists on the books but applies to no more than a handful of cases a year, constitutes meaningful reform. With respect, they are wrong. I believe we have struck the right balance here, and perhaps the only balance that can pass the House of Representatives at this time. A warrant requirement like the one imposed in the Protect Liberty Act is the reform we need to protect Americans and to allow surveillance laws to continue to keep us safe while also protecting our essential liberties. To end where I began, I have never voted to reauthorize Section 702. I am deeply uncomfortable, as we all should be, with the notion that it is permissible for the government to search our most private communications without a warrant simply because they were aiming for non-U.S. persons overseas. I understand, however, that Section 702 authority has become increasingly important to our national security. I recognize that letting it expire altogether would not be wise. The Protect Liberty Act was written with that reality in mind. Although I have long advocated for a range of reforms to the surveillance powers we vest in the intelligence community, federal law enforcement, and our state and local partners, this bill is not a catch-all for every reform we might like to see enacted one day. It is instead a balanced first step designed to preserve the underlying authority while curbing the abuses that most threaten our privacy. I thank Mr. Biggs, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the bipartisan group of civil liberties and national security experts we consulted for their hard work getting us to this point. I urge all members to support this legislation, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Well said. The gentleman yields back. Without objection,
It's
all
like
of the
get
opening
along
statements
day.
will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona for the purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purposes of amendment. The chair now recognizes the
Okay.
gentleman from Arizona to explain the amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. Also, I wanted to thank Mr. Nadler for his opening statement, for working with us on this important issue, and Ms. Jayapal, Ms. Lofgren, and the others across the aisle, and the staff from both sides of the aisle in this who've worked so hard to deliver this bill and this amendment. The most important aspect of this amendment in the nature of a substitute is the section dealing with Fourth Amendment is not for sale act, something that passed out of here almost unanimously. I think it was unanimously with one vote voting present. And with that, Mr. Chairman, other than that, it does nothing to alter the substance of the bill, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are here today to bring overdue reform to Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We all acknowledge the need to enact comprehensive reforms designed to protect American civil liberties. However, we also face a critical need to reauthorize Section 702 of FISA. In a bipartisan effort, members of the House Judiciary Committee have met with representatives from the House Intelligence Committee, industry experts, coalition groups, and the intelligence community to attempt to find common ground in ensuring the preservation of our constituents' constitutional rights, while also defending our homeland from acts of
How
terror.
are you?
In particular, I'd like to thank Chairman Jordan, Mr.
Welcome
Biggs,
in. I
Mr.
hope you have a
McClintock,
pea hoodie on
and
because
our
it's
Democrat
really big.
colleagues on the committee who have worked so hard in this endeavor. In an environment of pervasive threats of terrorism on our homeland, tools like Section 702 are a critical part of preventing conspiracies against the United States. However, in its current form, American civil liberties are at risk of being violated. We are gravely concerned about past instances of abuse and the potential for future abuses of the 702 querying program and of the FISC court. We are committed to ensuring that intelligence tools are used for the American people, not against the American people. And the work we have done this Congress will ensure that we protect civil liberties while we also protect our homeland. The Protect Liberty Act will strengthen civil liberty protections and ensure that FISA remains an effective instrument for terrorist surveillance by implementing strong reforms to use, oversight, and penalties for abuse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition?
Nope, nobody.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Chair. I support HR 6750 and I urge its passage. The revelations by the Department of Justice inspectors of court have shown a disappointing and frankly alarming
Right?
pattern of
There you
abuse by
go.
the FBI and its
That's
use
right.
of U.S. person data. These abuses have led to an increased calls for changes to Section 702 from both sides of the aisle. For example, the President's own Intelligence Advisory Board stated in its July 2023 report that complacency, a lack of proper procedure, and the sheer volume of Section 702 activity led to the FBI's inappropriate use of Section 702 authorities. Similarly, the Bipartisan Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board was unanimous in stating, although
God, you know,
all
you
U.S. person
gonna be like
queries by the intelligence
the
community
representative, like
present privacy and civil liberties risks,
part of your
FBI queries,
skill set
procedures,
should
and
be
practices
presentation.
pose the most significant threats to American privacy. But both groups have also been unanimous in the value of Section 702 to U.S. domestic
Jimmy,
and
they
national
drag
security.
it.
I think our bipartisan bill
Jimmy,
strikes the right balance
okay.
between our need to
Gibson,
protect
go.
national
Come on, Jeff.
security
Not a
with
go
our need to
home.
protect civil liberties
Send go.
and our Fourth Amendment rights as Americans.
Grift, send it.
First, HR 6750 will curb the FBI's abuses of Section 702 by restricting the use of U.S. person data. This bill will limit the number of FBI employees able to perform U.S. person queries, requiring that queries will only be for the purposes of retrieving foreign intelligence information, and subject U.S. person queries to the same evidentiary standard as other domestic search under the Fourth Amendment. It also provides more transparency into FISA court or FISC to ensure what happened with FISA application of Carter Page will never happen again.
Drink.
Finally, it provides for more accountability measures to ensure those who continue to abuse the query procedures face steep penalties for their actions.
Carter
I
Page.
want to thank my colleagues from Arizona, Mr. Biggs,
sorry.
for leading on this important issue,
come
as
out.
well as Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Nadler for their good faith negotiations to get this bill to a place where I believe it will pass overwhelmingly out of this committee. And I urge the
Really?
committee to support the bill. I yield.
Do you think so?
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from
he
Washington.
doesn't have a
who has
jacket.
been, working
Maybe he
tirelessly
runs
on this legislation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
I'm amending it to only looking at Democrats who are Americans, Americans who are
Amendment to the
Arizona
amendment in the
Reserve.
nature of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by Ms. Jayapal of Washington.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady is recognized on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by thanking you, thanking Ranking Member Nadler and Representative Biggs for offering this very strong legislation to overhaul FISA and to protect Americans' Fourth Amendment right to privacy. I'm very proud to be an original co-sponsor of this bill, the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act. This bill is a huge step forward to protecting Americans' privacy and civil liberties by simply requiring the government to get a warrant before searching for Americans' communications, fixing the loophole that currently allows the government to purchase Americans' sensitive data without a warrant, and more. I also want to just take a moment to thank my colleague on the other side of the aisle, who I've also worked very closely with on these issues, Representative Warren Davidson, who is not on the committee, but whose leadership has been critical. And Representative Zolofgren, who's unable to be here, but whose long-term leadership has been essential.
Not for
I want to offer a friendly amendment to strengthen the bill by addressing reverse targeting, a practice where intelligence agencies select foreign targets with the purpose of securing communications of persons in the United States.
No, it's 50-50.
We know that despite Congress's direction to intelligence agencies to minimize the retention and use of Americans' information incidentally collected under Section 702, agencies have actually done just the opposite. Last year alone, they conducted 200,000 warrantless backdoor searches for Americans' private communications. They've also regularly abused the weak protections that are in place, including baseless backdoor searches for people exercising their First Amendment right to protest, journalists, and even members of Congress. This bill takes an important step in requiring a warrant to search Americans' communications records, which would substantially reduce the risk of surveillance abuses, but warrants alone cannot eliminate the risk entirely, particularly for willful abuses. Similarly, a warrant requirement cannot prevent Section 702 databases from being hacked or otherwise accessed improperly. Accordingly, it's important not just to protect Americans' privacy at the point that agents are performing searches, but also at the time of collection. My amendment would accomplish that by strengthening existing prohibitions on the reverse targeting of Americans. That is, collection supposedly targeting a foreign person located abroad, but actually intending to collect the information of an American in contact with a foreign person. Currently, Section 702 prohibits the government from targeting foreign person if the purpose of the surveillance is to spy on an American. In practice, that means that even if the purpose of the surveillance is almost entirely to gather intelligence about an American, the government can still evade the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement as long as it has even a minor interest in the foreign person as well. Some may argue that the intent of the law is clear, but the standard is far too weak to protect Americans' constitutional rights. There should be no shortcuts to warrantlessly surveil Americans. Under my amendment, the government could not target a foreign person if a significant purpose of the surveillance is to spy on an American in contact with that foreign person. When the government wants to surveil Americans, it should be required to get a warrant or a FISA Title I order. It should not be able to evade this requirement because it also has some interest in a foreign person in contact with an American. If that were the case, the government would in theory be able to capture warrantlessly all of an American's international communications. And the Constitution simply doesn't allow this. I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this amendment to strengthen this excellent bill. We must ensure robust protections for Americans throughout the process, not just at the query stage. And aside from this particular issue, I hope we can continue working together to ensure that all surveillance happens pursuant to congressional authorities. I'm also eager for us to further crack down on data brokers and go further to protect Americans' medical and mental health records, financial records, and other private sensitive information. In the meantime, I am really delighted at the outcome of the bill to date. It's a crucial step to protect Americans from warrantless surveillance, and I hope to see it swiftly move to the House and Senate floors and urge President Biden to sign it into law without delay. I yield back.
Lady yields back. Does the gentleman insist on his point of order?
I withdraw my point of order.
Point of order withdrawn. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentlelady for the amendment and would hope that she would engage in a brief colloquy with me to discuss how the nature of this amendment to stop the reverse targeting that troubles us, that we've seen in the Inspector General's report, interfaces with this executive order, this 12333 executive order. And so is the gentlelady confident that if the amendment were adopted, that there wouldn't be a mechanism for reverse targeting under that executive order? I yield.
It doesn't touch 12333. I am confident that that this is an amendment that will help us to ensure that there's no evading of what we are all seeking, which is warrants and authority to surveil Americans.
I'm going to support the amendment. I think that it's virtuous in that goal. But does the gentlelady worry that if we leave the 12333 in place, that there might be some effort to undermine the good work of the amendment and the underlying bill?
As the gentleman knows, I have been worried about that. I continue to be worried about that. I think we're going to have to do everything we can to make sure that we're paying very close attention to this and continuing to try to move forward and have authority over that particular issue.
Yeah, I'm concerned about it because, you know, in my discussions with Ms. Lofgren, who, as the gentlelady states, is a recognized expert on this issue, I initially thought, well, let's just let this expire. It's been such an abused authority. Let's let it expire and see if we can design something anew that isn't littered with all of the loopholes that have allowed these abuses of people's civil liberties. And what Ms. Lofgren expressed to me is that if we were to just allow the legislation to expire, that these executive orders would persist with the veneer of authority and there wouldn't be the warrant requirements that we're all fighting for here. And so I am worried that all of this great effort that we've put into warrant requirements and our civil liberties is a bit illusory if what the Intel Committee is really arguing for is the preservation of this executive order that then allows the reverse targeting and the end run around the Fourth Amendment. And so that, I mean, that's a concern of mine that's going to persist throughout this. It's certainly not a reason to oppose this good amendment, but I think we do need to acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done. And it's a tell to me that the folks at the Intelligence Committee are willing to give us so much on the statutory reauthorization, but then at the same time, they're willing to give us nothing to bring 12333 into the scope of our reforms. And it's because they want a regime to exist outside the scope of those reforms. So that's, I would yield to the chairman if the chairman has any perspective on how these things we're doing now will interface with that executive order and how the Judiciary Committee ought to think about those things.
I would just say that, like the sponsor of the amendment, I have concerns. I think most members do. But I do think the product we are putting together that we have started with and the amendments that we anticipate being offered from both sides of the aisle, not all, but most are going to even improve that product. And then I think we have to think in a political dynamic. We know that the Intel Committee is marking up something different tomorrow and that there'll be a vote for the full House next week. So we think this, in consultation with the ranking member and members from both sides and the working group and everything else, we think this is the best product and the best way that we can do the most to protect the Fourth Amendment and other concerns for Americans' liberty.
No, I agree, Mr. Chairman. I think
okay?
you've endeavored upon yeoman's work here, but I don't want to be back at this committee a year from now, 18 months
Oh my
from
gosh, it's
now,
totally
where we've enacted our reforms
pre-planned.
and we've got some inspector generals sitting before us
They're trying
telling
to
us
fuck with
that,
our
that
minds.
the executive order provided all these avenues for the exact same abuses and the exact same conduct. Because I think what troubles us all in a bipartisan way is when you see the activities of the FBI
we
and others
disagree,
exceed the
and that's
scope of
okay.
the law.
Would
And
the
if
gentleman yield?
certainly, I'd yield to the ranking member.
I'd simply point out that to the extent
Just
an
a sound
executive order
check.
12
I
or
changed
any other,
microphones, so let me know
goes
if
against the legislation that we pass,
you
it
can
must
hear
yield to
me
the
all
legislation.
right.
Right. No, I agree with that, which is why I wanted to take the time to really get from Ms. Jayapal an understanding
Whoa.
of how those things weave
That
together. And
sounds like
it sounds like the amendment sponsor
oh,
saying
whoa,
this
you guys
this wouldn't provide a direct conflict with 12-333.
Would the gentleman yield?
Certainly.
This particular amendment does not touch
love
12-333. That does not mean, as I said, that I don't share your concerns about
I'm
12-333.
running
I think there
low.
will be other amendments that will touch different pieces.
Rogue Vest Day.
I don't think that there's a perfect
nice.
solution
I didn't
in
make
this.
it. I mean,
I think
I
that
was
what we are
going
doing
to
today
get up
is
and watch the
recognizing
sunrise, but
this
I was up
will
for the
be
sunrise,
an
but I wasn't in
enormous
a room
step
where I could see the
forward.
sunrise. Let's put it that
And
way.
given everything that you've mentioned about the dynamics of the intelligence community
My
and
point
our
is she's more
belief
with
that
than all
we need
baddies
to
that
have
go- yeah,
strong tools, of course, to
I know.
protect
Totally
intelligence,
no
but they
debate
cannot
necessary. That's the thing.
fundamentally
These
undermine
you are all
the civil
adults
liberties
and
and
we
privacy
all
of
have different
Americans.
opinions,
And I
and
think
this is a
that is
place where that can be okay,
that
and we
is the
can debate
place
when
that
we
we
want
are
to.
in.
And when
We're
we don't want to,
literally,
and we want to
I think,
absorb and
making
learn,
steps that
we do that too.
I don't know about you, but
It's all
maybe
good.
5 years ago, I didn't really believe
Very smart
were necessarily
cat.
possible, but here we are. And I think we just need to be extremely vigilant, recognize that, you know, in our initial offerings, I think you and I probably agreed on 12-333 and where we should go with that. But I think this is a big step forward. The amendment on its own, I think, is an important piece just to continue to close some of those ways in which we think that people might try to evade what our
Matt would
intent
like
is to
to
protect
throw the
privacy and civil
baby
liberties.
right out with the
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized.
He doesn't
Thank you,
want
Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the amendment. I
a 12-3.
commend Ms. Jayapal for
I'm
it.
getting a
I think a very simple explanation of it is very simple.
13848. I mean,
By
I
prohibiting
you have
when
to
a-
understand
by
me and
prohibiting
tattoos.
targeting
I love
when
tattoos. I have a
significant
fucking
purpose
tattoo
of
that
the
I got for
collection is to
$40.
target a U.S. person, not just when
And
the
my mind
purpose
can
is
always
to
be
target a
changed
U.S.
too.
person.
I totally
The
love
amendment would
this.
prevent
That's
intelligence
right.
agencies from skirting
It's
constitutional
in your
protection
file.
when they seek to gather
I actually wrote it.
intelligence about Americans. They could no longer say, well, you know, the entire purpose was not the U.S.
Cross it out.
The U.S. Citizen.
Oops.
This would say if it's a significant purpose, it's not permissible. I support the amendment to limit the ability of the
Oh,
intelligence
yeah.
community to
I would,
improperly
nothing
collect
would make me
information
prouder
about
than
U.S.
to have
persons. I commend Ms.
members of the
Jayapal for
Gal
her
Squad
dedication
get that tattoo.
and hard work on this issue. I think the amendment
I don't know where I'm
strengthens
gonna
the
put
bill
it.
and improves it, and I
I
urge
think I
its
know.
adoption. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I agree with the ranking
I think I
member.
was going to
Anyone
put
else
it on the
seek
back of
gentleman
my
sponsor the
on the
bill?
back of my
Mr. Biggs is recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
on the
Chairman.
left
I
shoulder.
support the
And I
Jayapal
have something
amendment.
on
I
the
think
on my right shoulder, so
even a district court
I'm gonna do that.
dealing with the U.S. versus
I have a badass tattoo. I got from
Hasbaj-Rami
Cleveland.
case,
What?
talked about in dicta, talked about
Wow.
this parallelism
That
that
is so
the
cool.
FBI and other agencies were using to
I
effectively
just got
conduct
one on
backdoor
those dumb
searches.
like Friday the
And this
13th
significantly closes that
tattoo
loophole. So
deals.
I think
That's all.
it's a really good move. And I'm also grateful to
And you had to
both
choose from like
both my
certain ones,
colleagues,
which was
Mr.
fine
Yates
because
and
I
Ms.
wanted a
Jayapal, for
ghost and
bringing
they
up
had a ghost.
EO 12333. I mean, that's something that I think we share a common view of, but we'll get more discussion about that as we go along. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized on the amendment.
I just want to briefly speak in favor of the amendment. I think it's very important. This is a huge gaping loophole in the law that's being closed by this amendment. I think it's very important. We've got to be careful that when we do, revise 702 and then when we put the protections in, that we don't leave gaping loopholes. And so I appreciate Ms. Jayapal's work on this and Ms. Lofgren's work on it. And I support it because without this amendment, I think a lot of the other reforms in this bill could be for naught. And with that, I yield back.
Val,
no worries. Please don't.
I just want to add
Take it easy.
my support for the amendment and
Val, I
associate
was just
myself with
looking
remarks
at
of my
ban
colleagues here
conversions. I'm
about why it's
seriously
important.
considering that.
That's already
I
been
may need to-
stipulated.
I
do think
definitely
on
need to go onto your
12,
channel.
I
But
think I don't take full comfort in the
also,
yielding to legislative protection.
one of my favorite
especially
streamers
in
in a
the
van
world in
is
which if the
Nomadic
executive
Introvert.
branch is
Have you ever seen
effectively
her?
saying they've got the
Nomadic Introvert.
with some
She's linked on
actually
my
basis
suggested
saying they've got
channels
the
page
constitutional
on
authority
my
to do what they need to
YouTube.
do with respect to going
On the
after
YouTube, on
foreign
the
actors and
YouTubes.
collect that
But
information.
she's great. I love her.
We've got to be mindful about how we're
She's
fully
so-
structuring this to protect against
it's just
abuses there.
like the
because I
whole
fully
vibe
believe if
is
we
like
let this
peaceful
expire,
and quiet,
or if 702 never existed,
not
the executive
fake
branch is going to
and
continue to go
not,
collect that
like-
information anyway, and they'll
That's just
backdoor
really
whatever the
good.
hell they want. So whatever we can do here, I think
Thanks,
it's hard to
Will.
go far enough to be able to say
Everybody
that we're
should
going to
have
do what
their-
we need
their
to do to
vest on
protect
today.
individual liberty
Oh
and
my
any
God,
of
this
the
guy?
backdoors. So
Jesus
with
Christ.
respect to this, I support the amendment.
Oh,
I
there's
want
a
us to
lot of
continue to
bellies
have this
behind
dialogue.
me.
Would the gentleman yield?
Well, it's
Sir,
the chair.
sir, you don't
Well,
want
yes, it's my
that
time.
belly
Yeah,
on
I yield.
TV.
I just want
Come
to
on
say
now.
I find it immensely encouraging that you and I found something we agree on.
Well,
let's-
we'll try not to make it happen too often. I yield back.
You watch her.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment from the gentlelady.
I'm sure
from
you do,
Washington.
yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, Minnie
Those
B
opposed,
just
no.
bought her van.
Opinion of the
She's so
chair, the
cute.
ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Oh my
Clerk
God,
will report the
we
amendment.
got a lot of amendments. Isn't this supposed to be happening like a rules
Amendment to the
committee?
amendment in the
or
nature
from-
of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by Mr.
Without
Klein.
objection, the amendment will be considered as read.
Wow,
Point of order is
don't cut
reserved
her
by the
off.
sponsor
That's
of the
really
legislation. The gentleman from
painful
Virginia
to
is
listen
recognized
to.
to speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I offer this amendment to ensure that when a judge decides whether to permit surveillance under FISA, it is critical that judge have detailed and accurate information about the case. Sadly, we've learned over
Is
the
this a
years that government
dossier
lawyers
thing?
frequently fail
Is
to
this a
include
dossier
important
thing?
and relevant information in FISA applications. often
So you're
leaving out
saying
facts that could
everything
lead a
has
judge
to be
ask more
like
challenging questions or to
completely
decline
vetted?
to authorize surveillance.
Well, then
This
it's
amendment
not
requires a
really
set of procedures to be in place to
fucking
ensure that applications for a court order under FISA are accurate and
hate these
complete,
guys.
and that they include information that could call into
How are
question
you
the accuracy or
doing?
reliability of
Scotus man
assessments or
one.
reporting in an application,
That's your
including
Twitter handle.
details about an
Everyone should follow.
applicant's prior or existing relationship with the target.
They're
This amendment also
discussing
requires annual auditing and compliance
reauthorization of
mechanisms to
Section
ensure accurate
702, which
procedures
is
are effective.
surveillance on
Importantly,
U.S.
any federal officer
persons
applying for a court
as part
order
of the
under FISA
FISA
must describe
court.
the
Remember
accuracy of
Carter
procedures
Page and all
used
that
and certify
bullshit.
that he or she has
So that's
collected
what
and
we're
reviewed supporting
they're debating
documentation
it.
for
But
each assertion in the
everybody
application.
seems to have
Judges in
taken
turn
their
will
happy
only be
pills
allowed to
today.
enter an order
So
under FISA if they find that the accuracy
everybody's
procedures
just loving on
described in
each
the
other. It's
application are
basically
adequate.
Caligula
This amendment would,
almost
in
up in
essence,
here
bolster the
without the
affidavit that Section
violence.
6 of the bill requires.
If
and is an
Caligula
additional
were a
protection for the
rom-com,
American people. Urge
that's
my
what we're
colleagues to support
watching.
the amendment, and I yield back.
Always. When
Gentleman
when
yields
it
back.
wait,
The
when is it
gentleman
not?
from
When is
Arizona
it not awake and
withdraws
big
his
morning for
point
me?
of order, and the gentlelady from North Carolina is
I
recognized
am
to speak on the
I'm
amendment.
living my life. I'm
Thank
living
you
my
very much,
best,
Mr.
the best life I
Chairman,
can.
and
It's not a
thank
great
you
life,
very
but it's
much
the best
to
life I
Congressman
can.
Klein for introducing this amendment. I too have been working on the same thing. I think it's so important that before anything moves forward, that we have accurate information. I do want to add, this amendment would also require that exculpatory information be provided to the judge and to the other side.
Can you
And
tell me what's going on
currently
here?
that is not happening. And so that's just
sure.
another reason why this amendment is so important. And I commend the amendment to the committee.
Gentlelady yields back. I too support the amendment and encourage the adoption. Chair
I mean,
recognizes
I don't
the
mind if it's accurate. I'm just saying, what's the definition of accurate?
I
Is it
support the
like,
adoption. I think it's an excellent amendment. I yield back.
question occurs on the
would
amendment
they
offered by the
use,
gentleman
well,
from
okay,
Virginia.
I
All
guess
those in
that's
favor say
true. I
aye.
mean, would it be
Aye.
the
Those
same
opposed,
level of
no.
warrant
In
that
the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is
for
adopted.
search of a
and
U.S.
become part of the
citizen?
bill. The chair now
No
recognizes the
worries. See you in
gentleman
a
from
few, gal.
California.
Take care.
Gentleman from California to offer for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by
Objection, the
Mr.
bill will be considered as read. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California to speak on the amendment. Point of order reserved by the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, first, I welcome the opportunity to have this conversation about the balance of civil liberties and national security. And I would first say that the Biden administration, more than any administration, has addressed many of these issues with executive actions that they've taken to reduce the number of U.S. person inquiries that have been made to make sure that they're more targeted and more precise and aimed at legitimate national security problems. Since they've done that, the FBI has reduced its overall querying by 94% of U.S. persons. And I support codifying and putting into law anything that does that. However, I also, and by the way, my amendment codifies executive order principles around privacy that the administration has espoused. I want to speak, though, to a larger concern that I have with the bill. And I first want to speak personally, because there's nobody on this committee who has been a bigger victim of the weaponization of the intelligence community than me. I have had my cell phone data subpoenaed and procured by the Trump administration. In 2012, in a district with 40% Asian Americans, an Asian volunteer helped my campaign. I was later asked by the FBI to help the FBI understand who this person was. I did, cooperated. They took care of a threat I was not aware of. And then years later, under the Trump administration, an IC official leaked my cooperation, perverted it, suggested wrongdoing. Fox News ran with it. A member of this committee filed an ethics report against me. Thousands of death threats have come at me. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from me have been spent to protect myself and my family. I was removed from the Intelligence Committee by Speaker McCarthy to only learn a few months ago that the Ethics Committee took years for that complaint
Russia was correct.
to find that what was alleged was not substantiated, and the complaint was closed, and no wrongdoing was found. So I know what it's like
I mean,
when
they
an
do.
administration misuses the intelligence community to go after an enemy. I know it. I've felt it. Paid the price for it.
That's weird.
But this bill to take away the intelligence community's ability to see threats from foreign terrorists and who they may be communicating with is going to leave us in the blind and take us back to the days before September 11th. And I would suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, it's not an accident that we have not had a serious terrorist attack in America since September 11th. Our post-September 11 responses, we got it wrong in many ways. We got it wrong around Islamophobia. We probably haven't been perfect in the way we get people on airplanes. But what we have done to surveil terrorists overseas has been largely successful. And now we are saying that if a foreign terrorist references a US person, that the only way for the FBI to protect us here at home is to go and get a warrant to learn more about the US person that is referenced on data that has already been lawfully collected. They're not going to be able to do it. They're not going to be able to establish probable cause if all they have is a name, a selector, an email, a phone number. And the courts have told us it'll take them 4 months to do it. So we are putting ourselves in a position where foreign terrorists could be talking about a US person. We could have already lawfully collected information from other foreign terrorists that reference this US person. And we are telling the FBI, you cannot search that database to see if there's any pattern of that US person talking to a foreign terrorist. Maybe the US person is just innocently ordering a pizza from a suspected foreign terrorist, or that US person is constantly in contact with that person.
Or the
and is going
person
to
is a
blow up
target.
church. We are now taking away the FBI's ability to do that. That makes me very nervous, and it takes us back to a
Although I guess we
pre-September
wouldn't
11
surveil it.
environment. And I think we can do this in a better way that protects civil liberties without leaving us so vulnerable to a catastrophic terrorist attack. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Oh dear.
Thank you,
Here we
Mr.
go.
Chairman.
Now the gloves are off.
I
Jenny.
support the amendment, and accept the amendment, and
I
encourage
hate
people
Eric
to adopt the
Swalwell
amendment.
and
I
his
would refute
bulging biceps.
and take issue with the conjecture with regard to the overall
Conjecture.
underlying bill, and I appreciate your perspective. I disagree with it. One of the things that
We
we've
know.
done is we've put, if there is an exigent circumstance, we put an exigent circumstance exception right into this bill that is consistent. If there's a cybersecurity issue, we've put that into the bill as an exception as well. But it's hard to
So if it
it's
comes
hard
through the
to
mail,
justify
or if it comes
status
online,
quo
I'm just
ante this
kidding.
bill. I mean,
I don't know.
with
I
the-
know
without this
exigent
bill,
doesn't mean in the mail.
knowing that the number of
I'm just praying.
improper queries that have been performed by the FBI, for instance, last year, over 250,000. And with that, I'll yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Yeah, I guess in accepting this amendment, has the bill sponsor, I would point your attention to page 3, subsection K,
Ah,
when the amendment references protecting the integrity of elections
Look
and
at that.
political
who's
processes.
that fucker next to him? Is
What's a
that Ken
political
Buck or something?
process that
Oh,
would be appropriately
oh.
protected by
Ooh.
this amendment? Does that give you any concern?
Aren't you guys kind of close together?
I took
Probably
political
just the
process
perspective.
to be
Sorry.
this type of political process, Congress.
But can you not see how someone utilizing that authority might see it differently?
I can.
Does that concern you?
Believe me, it all concerns me, Mr.
And perhaps I'll ask the sponsor of the amendment. Mr. Swalwell, how should I understand the phrase political processes in line 21 of page 3 of the amendment?
Are you going to
This is
scratch your
directly
skin off
from
there, Matt?
The executive order from the White House that has seen.
Is that 12-333, that executive order, or a different one?
No, a different one. And by protecting the integrity of elections and political processes, it's exactly what Mr. Biggs said. This one, ours.
Okay,
I yield back.
yield back.
Weird.
There was still time left for the gentleman from Arizona yield back. Gentleman
He
yields
did.
back.
He
The
just did.
gentleman from
Are you
California,
listening?
Mr. Correa, is recognized.
I
On the amendment.
got
Thank you, Mr.
it.
Chairman. I wanted to yield some time to my colleague from California, Mr. Swalwell, for the purpose of really addressing the comments just made. You mentioned the possibility of 4 months to get a warrant. You also mentioned the administration's efforts to better secure our civil liberties. I would ask you to, with some comments here, I'm going to yield you some time to explain a little bit more on your perspective on that. I agree with you. We haven't had a terrorist attack in this country in a long time. Given the nature of the world right now, heightened state of alert, so to speak, please explain to me warrant, civil liberties, and the status of the world situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Correa. I guess this bill ignores the extensive remedial measures that the FBI and the Department of Justice has taken in response to FBI's compliance failures. In 2021 and 2022, the FBI and DOJ implemented a battery of policy changes. Among other things, FBI systems now require personnel to opt in to 702 data before query of the database can be conducted, which reduces the risk of inadvertent queries, to the point that Mr. Biggs made of abuses in the past. FBI personnel must also obtain attorney approval to conduct sensitive queries. So the most sensitive to, I think, the point Mr. Gates was making would be of elected officials or people in journalism or of a celebrity status who speak on politics. It now requires leveling up the approvals that have to be given before that can happen. And the most sensitive, like elected officials, require the personal prior approval of the deputy FBI director. FBI personnel must also take required training or risk losing access to 702. Since those reforms have been put in place, FBI U.S. person queries dropped by 94%, and the query compliance rate rose to 98%. So seeking to extend this positive trend, the FBI announced a 3-strike policy with escalating consequences for negligent FISA violations. And so I just want to address what Mr. Biggs said earlier. Mr. Biggs, you mentioned the exigencies that exist for cyber or terrorism, and I acknowledge those, but my concern, and I hope the chair is listening to this as well, is if you have a foreign terrorist who you've already lawfully been able to target with 702, and that foreign terrorist is talking about a U.S. person, but not talking about that U.S. person with a specific terrorism plot, but just saying, we've been in contact with John Smith, or in their emails, you see John Smith is CC'd. That probably doesn't qualify under the exigency that you have established in this bill. But if John Smith goes and blows up a church, I think all of our constituents are going to say, why the hell didn't you go back and see if you already had lawfully collected information about John Smith to stitch together how many times John Smith was talking to overseas terrorists? And so if you have an exigency that allows them to do that, I welcome that. I'm just saying that that is the blind spot that we're kind of creating right here. I'll yield back to Mr. Correa, and I think Mr. Biggs may have a response.
Yep.
Thanks for the double yield. In the scenario that you posit, you're using about language of Section 702, which is already extremely problematic. And that is one thing that all of us have been concerned about, is because in the court cases that you can review on this, you'll see that the FBI has actually abused the about language. The Inspector General specifically pointed out that some of these queries that were done illegitimately were using the about section of the statute. And so that's why I'm not necessarily accepting your hypothesis, because that section has been widely abused by the FBI and the other alphabet soup.
No, let's not be too, dismissive.
Mr. Correa, do you yield back? Gentleman yields back. Pardon me? Oh, Mr. Vander, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I do understand the gentleman from California, and I understand his concerns. And this is the difficult issue with all this. But we are going to accept that, if you accept, and I don't, but if you accept that things are so much better now, and we're going to be okay because of what folks are doing because of one particular order by the president, whatever. No, we have to be really careful here. We have to understand that this is about Fourth Amendment rights. It's about First Amendment rights. That's why this bill is necessary. None of us want to see terrorists have free reign. None of us don't want to investigate terrorists and, quite frankly, the evil people that exist around the world and in our country who want to do great harm to our republic and our democracy. But the bottom line here is, almost the only thing worse than the terrorists themselves are when our regulatory agencies terrorize free, independent people to actually be able to speak and do what they want. I do not support the amendment. I think that this bill has been a labor of love. It's taken a good deal of time. It addresses the serious issues and lets individuals
Yeah, who
move
said he has
forward when they
stuff
really
on
need
that
to. When I
case?
say
Oh,
individuals,
Santos,
I mean
right?
those in
Isn't
regulatory
he,
agencies
who's
to
he
move
talking
forward. It
to?
allows judges to move forward. At the same time, puts a
Ashford
check
or
on
something.
what is done. And to use the statistic that we're 96%
Regular
better,
terrorism.
well, we're
Oh, that's a good
96%
one.
better
That's a
over
great one.
millions
Regular
of mishaps,
terrorism. That's a very good one.
inappropriate intrusions into people's personal lives, intrusion into their freedom. And I'm going to probably say this another time today, but Ben Franklin got it right. Those that would give up freedom for safety deserve neither. This bill, without this amendment and with
Is he from
Mr. Klein's
Massachusetts?
amendment, does just that. I yield back.
The gentleman yield. Gentleman yield.
I yield to the chair.
Thank you.
Just did. Leave him
Because I
alone.
know it's obvious to every member, but for the record, we are talking about a statute that cannot, by definition,
vampire.
preempt the Constitution. And the
Like, when
gentleman
I was a little
referred to the
kid,
Fourth
he was
Amendment, so I'll
that
take a moment and
old.
read it. The
He has
right
not
of the
changed
people,
since
being
I
us,
was a child.
to be secure in their homes,
Not kidding.
persons,
Like,
papers, and effects
simulacrum.
against unreasonable
Is that
searches and
simulacrum?
seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall be issued
This is good because I had
but
to get this
upon probable
microphone plugged in
cause
today to
supported by
do
oath
final
or
recording.
affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The reason I read that is there's no question we're talking about people's effects. And when the Constitution was written, they assumed that there would be no searches without a warrant. And so the very discussion that we don't need a warrant, but that we will in fact search a person's based on our determination of reasonable being the administration and without warrant was
Hey,
inherently
Kathy.
from
Good
day
morning.
one in violation of the Constitution. And so as much as I normally try to agree with my gentleman from California, I think we have to go back to the Constitution, which assumes a warrant except in exigent circumstances, which is not called out in the Constitution, but has been affirmed by the court. And that is what I believe that all of us, whether we support this particular amendment or not, but to support the underlying bill, are here to discuss today. The fact that the administration says that for a time, by policy, they will make changes can give no one an assurance that their Constitution is being protected by statute if that statute is not consistent with the Fourth Amendment, which I think we can all agree in this case is unambiguous. And I thank the gentleman so much for yielding.
And would the gentleman from New Jersey yield for the last 30 seconds?
I will yield to the gentleman from California.
Thank you. I hope you still support this amendment because this amendment is separate from my concern about the warrant requirement. This amendment simply puts into the bill the Enhancing Safeguards for United States Signals Intelligence Activities, EO 14086, which has led to the reduction in queries that have been problematic. So this, and I believe this amendment has been accepted by the majority. I just wanted to clarify that for you, and I'd yield back.
Gentleman is back. The ranking member is recognized for
That's a
5
great
minutes.
idea.
I thank the chairman. I want to point out.
I'm sure some of my readers
gentleman
are
from New
too.
Jersey.
Rocana. You know,
Obviously,
Rocana's
there's a
been a
warrant requirement in
disappointment
the
to me.
Constitution. The entire
It was during the
purpose
election,
of
I
this
think.
bill is to flesh out and enforce that warrant requirement.
Search, for example,
in cases in which
of
it isn't
oh,
properly being enforced now. In section 702 and some other things. That's the entire purpose of the bill, is to flesh out and to and to more robustly enforce
Do a word
the warrant
of the
requirement where it
Eastman
isn't being
briefing.
enforced. As to the amendment, I want to thank Congressman Swalwell for his thoughtful amendment that would codify the scope of surveillance in order to more robustly protect Americans' communications. The amendment codifies the approach adopted by President Biden in Executive Order 14086. The amendment would strengthen the president's actions by making the objective statutory law. The objectives directly encompass information related to transnational risks to public health, humanitarian threats, hostage taking, protection against espionage, cybersecurity threats, threats to U.S. personnel, and a number of other vital categories of intelligence. My understanding is that there is a strong consensus for this amendment in both the executive and legislative branches. I also express my support for this measure. I want to thank Mrs. Swalwell for the amendment, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yield to the gentlelady from
Oh,
Wyoming.
boy.
Sure, I'll yield to the gentlelady. I unyield back, and I yield to the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Just very quickly, I am opposed to this amendment on
Oh,
page
no
2. You
shit,
can see that
Harriet.
they're attempting to
George.
insert as describing transnational threats as being climate and other
And I'm not
ecological
mocking you
change.
physically, it's
I
that
don't believe
you
that
are
that has
as
any,
big a
that
liar
that
as
is
George
appropriate to
Santos.
include that kind of
That's my problem
information
with you.
in this bill. I don't think it has anything to do with what we're discussing.
Personally,
I'm
her
opposed to
turquoise
the
jewelry
amendment
is
as they try
amazing.
to
However,
expand their climate change hysteria into this area as well. So I'm opposed to this amendment.
Gentlelady yields back.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
she's not gentle.
Gentleman from Colorado was recognized to strike the last
There ain't
word.
nothing gentle about her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to actually engage in a colloquy with you if you're interested, but the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, does not require a warrant for the federal government to access information that it has already legally collected. And let me clarify, if I may. If a police agency, federal, state, local, conducts a legal search warrant, and in the process of looking for, let's say, child pornography, they come across a bag of cocaine. They can take that bag of cocaine and charge the defendant, even though there wasn't a warrant, even though there wasn't anything in the warrant
There's
for that,
Ken.
because it was in
Oh,
plain
it is
view.
Ken. He was
So
the
they
one.
didn't get a warrant for the bag of
You
cocaine.
did?
If they
That's
conduct a search warrant for
cool.
child pornography,
Like in the raw,
and they
like the raw
find evidence of a
fragment or
crime for
something?
someone
That's
that is not covered by that search warrant,
Old rock.
they can use that evidence against another person, and that person doesn't even have standing
Rocks are cool.
to challenge the legality of the original search warrant. The information in this situation has been collected legally. It has been collected by the federal government because it is the property of foreign entities. Could be the Chinese government, it could be Hamas, it could be various others. And in that information, there is the name of a U.S. citizen or an email from a U.S. citizen. So the information was collected legally, and now the government is going in to search a particular U.S. citizen's name. The warrant requirement is something that we, Congress, is placing on the federal government over and above what the Constitution requires. I believe it's appropriate. I'm not suggesting it's not appropriate. It is absolutely appropriate that we give additional protections to Americans in this very sensitive area. But it is not something that the Constitution requires, and that's what the courts have found. And that's why it's so important that we come together and decide where the line is between national security and protecting the privacy of American citizens. And I yield to
The
the
gentleman would yield. I couldn't agree with you more that drawing that line is our responsibility. And
Doesn't it
in
feel
spite of the
good when
court's
we all get
determinations and administration's determination, it falls to this committee to draw the line.
warm
I
feeling
might try to
inside?
put as a question, if our founding fathers saw a ship coming into port and it opened, took the bag of mail coming from Britain or some other country, and it opened it up and
tree
it
falls in
looked at
the
every
forest and it appears to have been in
addressee,
contact
it may or
with
may not
a
violate
verified
their
Russian
constitutional right to
asset.
privacy because it's not yet their
Uh,
things.
Does anyone
But if
care?
it opened every letter and read every letter and said, well, it's a foreigner's
Would it do-
piece of
does it have
mail
time
until
to
it's
do that?
delivered to the American, and then said, but it's already
How
in our
can it do
database.
that
So
when it can't
now
even
we
get
have
our
what we
mail
need
to us?
against the American. Every American would have been outraged
How in the world
that
would they
his
possibly get all that
prospective
work
mail
done?
was opened and read on the guise that it
Oh,
came from a
God.
foreign source.
How can the
And that's what
CIA
we're
drop
here to
the ball? I
decide
mean, they
is
do all this other
what
shit, and
from a
that's the
foreign
ball they
source
drop? I
collection
don't
without
know.
a
Bag of
separate
mail.
warrant can be looked at
No, he said,
and
I
used.
am a bag
So
of
I agree with the
mail.
gentleman that that which
Yes.
is in
I'm
open
telling you right now,
databases,
Joe,
that which is
this guy,
collected
I
from
grew up
open
in
source is
California.
certainly
This guy has
available
been this
to the
old since
domestic
I was a kid,
agencies
and
without
I'm
a
an old
warrant.
lady now.
But
I'm
that
just
which would
saying,
require a
somewhere in
warrant
his
for an
attic
American
is a really
U.S.
fucked up
person
picture. That's
cannot
all I'm gonna
simply
say.
say, well, we got the U.S. person because we were
The
looking
mail.
at a
No,
foreign
yeah, well,
person.
mayo
That
is
would
good
not
too.
qualify. And
It
I think
works.
if we go back to
It's
original intent,
equally
it would not
ludicrous. How about
have
that?
approved every piece of mail coming into port being
It's
opened
equally
based on it
ludicrous.
belonging to a foreigner and then using that database against American citizens. So hopefully that draws that middle ground that we are seeking here today.
Gentlemen, you, or
Does it?
reclaim my
Does it
time.
really?
I agree with the gentleman, and all I'm saying is that we are trying to find that sweet spot that protects Americans' rights over and above the constitutional protection that they already have, and at the same time does not put Americans at risk for foreign terrorist spies, hackers, and others. And so while the Constitution is absolutely clear as to Americans' property in America, as that ship came into America, it's absolutely clear what protections Americans have without the government agency getting a warrant. We are going over and above that. Absolutely appropriate that we do so. But I want to make sure that it is not, we're not trying to find the area that is, we're not trying to interpret the Fourth Amendment in a way that is different than what the courts have already interpreted it as. And I, unless the gentleman
It would just briefly say that I do differ from the gentleman in a small way. I don't believe that we are constrained by the court's decisions based on laws we passed. Constitutional interpretation, yes, but laws we've passed, we are open to change and change them is often in contradiction or response to a court's
You
decision.
got your Hellman's
In
people.
other words,
You got
push
your
back
Miracle
on the court's
Whip
decision
people.
by
And
changing the
finally, you
law
got your
to
British
change
mail
the
people.
outcome.
British mail
And
comes in
that's also what
bags?
we're considering
What?
doing here today.
I think we are. We're considering
size?
adding
How
additional
do you,
protections
what?
for Americans, which is appropriate, but it goes
And by the way,
beyond just the
Hellman's
scope
on the
of the
West
Fourth
Coast
Amendment.
is called
And
Best
I yield
Foods.
back.
So get
Clearly
it right.
does. And with that, I
You
believe
got
the
a
gentleman
national
from
audience here,
California,
Joe. You
Mr.
gotta be,
Schiffer, to
you
seek
gotta be a little more
recognition.
cosmopolitan
You're
now.
moved to strike the last
You're
word.
in
You're
the big
recognized for
time
5
there,
minutes.
bud.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know,
And I'll be brief. I
come on now.
rise in support of the Swalwell
Just, you know,
Amendment, which
follow me.
codifies
No,
procedures
do
and
not.
protections
Do not
put in
follow
place
me.
by the administration to address issues that have been raised by the FISA court. I think we can all, I hope, recognize that 702 has been an incredibly important tool to protect Americans, to protect the country. I think we should also recognize that there have been a lot of problems with the use of 702 that have been revealed by FISA court judges. Most of them systemic and perhaps unintended errors, others intentional. All are meriting or addressing in this bill. And the challenge, I think, for all of
Hey,
us
there's my
is
congressman.
how do we address the problems identified by the FISA court, at the same time not imposing requirements that would essentially negate the effectiveness of 702 in protecting the country. I think Mr. Swalwell's amendment advances our security without hampering legitimate use of 702 to protect the country. I think it strikes the right balance. There are other provisions of the bill that I am concerned about that may effectively negate law enforcement's legitimate use to protect the country of 702. But I think Mr. Swalwell's amendment is an improvement to the bill and strikes the right balance, and I urge its support.
Well, there you go.
Gentleman yields back.
Just lost because everybody hates Adam.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized yet.
I thank the chairman, and I will begin this, and I hope I'm not about to embarrass myself by momentary inattention. I had to step out for a bit. And by the time I got back, this was well underway. And so I just started reading it as I've been
Are
listening
you
to the
kidding me
debate.
right now? Well, then I think
And
you
then
don't
Mr.
get to
Biggs
talk.
walked over and
That's
indicated that
pretty
he had
much
said
how
he
I think
thought this
that
might be
goes.
acceptable.
Sorry. Not sorry.
If
Should've
first of all,
been
if
here
I just
earlier.
yield to the gentleman, Mr.
Should've stopped
Swalwell,
pooping.
we're talking about the amendment that modifies the definition of what foreign intelligence information is. Is that right, sir?
This
Oh,
codifies the
crap.
administration's guidance on
I'm
collection
gonna
of
stop.
signals intelligence.
Is it the one that modifies section
Hi, Basket Package.
1801E
How you doing?
that defines foreign
Adam Schiff
intelligence
is the one we
information?
should write about impeaching a judge.
That's correct. It
Thank
is.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then first of all, I'm very pleased with the
What?
general
Oh,
tenor
yeah.
of this hearing
That's
and
a good
the
idea.
bipartisanship on this
I should go
important
down there
reform
and like
measure.
volunteer.
But as to this, I find myself stunned that that
Although
folks are talking about this as it might be
I can't
acceptable.
really
It takes foreign intelligence
follow
information under the
directions.
statute as it now exists
I
is
have a really hard
defined
time following
as
directions.
5 categories: actual and potential attack or other grave hostile acts of a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power. 2, sabotage, international terrorism, or the international proliferation of weapons of mass destruction by a foreign power or agent of a foreign power. 3, clandestine intelligence activities by an intelligence service or network of a foreign power or by an agent of a foreign power. Then there are 2 more. This comes under subparagraph 2. The national defense information that relates to, information with respect to a foreign power or foreign territory that relates to and if concerning a United States person is necessary to the national defense or security of the United States, or B, the conduct of foreign affairs of the United States. Those 5 categories. This proposes, as I understand it, to introduce 11 new categories, to triple, at least by numerical categories, what is defined as foreign intelligence information. It also, whereas most of those things, all of those things seem to involve, if you talk about conduct of foreign affairs or national defense or the security of the United States, those are pretty broad categories and might not, but everything else above that
I can't read
involve
his
acts of a
nameplate.
foreign power, and
I think
most of
it's
them
that
are
character
really severe
actor from
military
like
kind of potential violent attacks.
one of those comedy
This
shows.
expansion by adding,
Hey, guy, move your head.
adding
Move your fat head.
twice as many
Please.
categories as exist to the bill
Everyone
on
who
the
wants to get rid of the
fly
ability to monitor U.S.
has
citizens,
all sorts of stuff in here that is
Yeah, a little
pure
bit.
political in its nature,
Sarah, good
some of which
morning.
you could be
How
seen that
are
way.
you?
For example, protecting the integrity of elections and political processes, government
I can't
property.
read his name because fat head's not moving his
If
head.
somebody committed some vandalism for
Someone doesn't
involving some
understand
government
marking.
property in Dubai, it's suddenly in the
Why are you
definition
all of a sudden so
foreign
worried
intelligence
about this?
information. There's almost nothing you couldn't pack into these new expanded definitions. The whole problem that we face where FISA
If I want to
seems
go
to be a
to
consensus in this committee that FISA
Moscow and
requires
get my
serious
toes
reform
licked,
is it's
let me
been
do it.
too
I don't
broad,
want to tell anybody
too
about it.
carelessly administered, and the government is doing things to then say we're going to expand the definition of the very notion of foreign intelligence information massively. That is, I could say that.
Absolutely. No, there
I
is
just wanted to take us
I'm
through
sorry.
it sort of
I'm so sorry.
forensically.
I don't mean to
And I hope
belittle
I've gotten,
this.
maybe I should still
There
say
are
since there's a little bit
definitely
more time available.
legitimate
Couple other
concerns
things.
about surveillance. It's just an
Protecting
odd
against
kind of
illicit finance.
feel for this.
Gosh, illicit finance could involve
Maybe
some
this is
things
the
that
way
get
it
in the
happens
category of
when they're
foreign
just
intelligence information,
hashing
but it's
out amendments.
grossly overbroad. Does that mean every criminal conspiracy involving money laundering in the world is suddenly opened up into foreign intelligence information? We've just imported that into the definition of foreign intelligence information.
Isn't that
If you
foreign
get into the parts of
intelligence?
the ones
Did
on
I-
climate
did I
change,
miss something?
transnational threats that impact global security, including climate and other ecological change. We're making everything
Right.
involving that foreign intelligence information. That's the
No,
proposal, and somebody
actually, it
suggested
says
that could be
including.
acceptable. With all due respect to my
think
friend
it said
and
including.
colleague from Arizona. This one's I won't say the word. This one doesn't make sense to me, and I may have, if I've missed something about what's happened here, then I regret taking the committee's time. But it seems to me to be
Bob Menendez
a
has a son in
massive
Congress.
change
His
in
name
the
is Rob
expansion
Menendez.
of the whole categorical
Great.
application of
Well,
what foreign intelligence information is in an environment where we've recognized as being abused as it is. I yield.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, the gentleman from Texas.
So I want to associate
You'd
myself.
move to strike the last word?
Yeah,
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
want to associate myself with the concerns raised by the gentleman from North Carolina. We are here in a unusual display of bipartisanship designed, I believe, to protect the civil liberties of the United States citizens. And importantly, that means constraining and limiting the breadth and depth of how FISA can be used and then turned around and targeted to the American people. My friend from North Carolina raises significant issues that are raised in this. One he did not mention when he added in, including climate and other ecological change, and putting aside some political differences across the aisles about our concerns about relative topics here. This is a massive expansion of the focus
I didn't know that's how you.
of
I was
what
just
is
looking
supposed
at
to be
a
directed
baking
towards
thing about how
foreign
to store
intelligence
sugar.
that's designed to protect the United States
It's
from
pretty
foreign
cool.
threat,
Oh
immediate
God.
threat, danger directly to the American people in the form of a foreign actor, a foreign country, engaging with weapons of mass destruction or direct threats, but not what is now opening this up to political weaponization. And I would note in here, in addition to the climate and other ecological change, public health risks. And public health risks.
David says, haven't we had
Now,
enough
we just
money
went
laundering and
through
narco
an
trafficking by the intelligence
extraordinary
community?
circumstance in this country over the last 3 or 4 years, and
Well,
in
this
which there are
is
questions
an
raised about the
excellent
powers of the World Health Organization and
idea.
others. And we want to say that
Everyone, make
somehow,
sure whatever you need plugged in is
public
plugged
health
in.
risks.
Would the gentleman yield to that
'Cause I don't
point?
want to assume
I'll
everybody's
yield because I
vaping.
do want,
I
and I
over
do want to
there.
yield time to respond to the gentleman from North Carolina and me about the concerns.
Sure.
Hey, Max, how
On the
you
public health
doing?
risk, I think you would agree because there were legitimate concerns about whether COVID was a leak from the
Sure.
Wuhan lab. Well, the only way, the most effective way to determine that would be if our intelligence community had authorities to direct surveillance at foreign nationals, at Chinese or anyone else that they would communicate with. So this is articulating that public health is a reason that we would want to aim our surveillance capabilities overseas. And I yield back.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate
working
what
on
you're
it.
trying to argue there. My concern is, right,
I'm
we already have
working on it.
language
I'm
in the
working
existing
on
statutes,
it.
right, where it's actual or potential attack or other grave hostile acts of a
Working
foreign
on
power
that.
or an agent
Come
of a
on,
foreign
Brain. I am
power.
smoking as much and as fast as
If
I
our federal
can.
government currently
I
believed
woke up
that
at
they were
5:30
going to
a.m., which is
carry
not
out an
unusual. I
attack,
wake
a
up at that time.
biological attack, or some other action,
Man.
I believe it's there in the statute because,
Shit.
but
I
it's
fell asleep
important
last
when we
night pretty
start line
early.
iteming these kinds of things. We are now
Reading the Eastman brief, which
expanding
I
the
still haven't
zone
finished,
of
and I
foreign
lost all my
intelligence in
annotations,
ways
which
that is
I'm
deeply
very mad
concerning.
about, and I don't really want to talk about
And
it.
I understand that the language
And it made me
currently
really
might
sad.
still capture what the
It really
gentleman's
did.
saying. So that
So
might seem
I went to bed.
contradictory, but by putting this language in this list of all of these things, public health, climate, and other ecological change, I believe that we are massively expanding the scope
So
of
I
foreign
might go
intelligence
over it
away
if we have
from
energy after
the
this.
direct, imminent harm, attack idea
Assault
of the limitation.
on
In other
our
words, we have
eyes and
230
ears.
whatever thousand or 250,000, whatever the number is, targets, right? When we're
Oh,
focusing
I
on
know,
foreign
Joe. I
targets,
sent it to
whatever the numbers
you.
are, we have some limited
So
number,
I was
right?
so
And
happy to see
if we
it.
start expanding the zone
I'm
on the
hoping that
definition,
they just
we're going to
release
have 1 million
everything that.
targets or
Oh,
2 million
thank you
targets,
so much.
5 million targets.
That
And
would
then
be
that's
great.
going
I'm
to be
gonna.
collecting more
Hey,
information,
I
collecting more
wonder
information
too
on Americans in the
if I could
conversation, in the
possibly
exchange of
maybe
communications
also
between
refer to
Americans
your
and those
thread.
individuals.
Is
And I think
that?
the whole point here
But
of
that's
this
nice. Thank you
legislation
so
is
much.
to limit the breadth of FISA
It's
and
a
to
long
limit
one,
its
but I
possible
kind of want to do
direction
it.
on
I might,
American
you know what I
citizens.
might do?
If we
I
want to
might
have a
stop
different
this stream
debate
after this
on the
nonsense,
definitions of
and
FISA,
then immediate
that
or
might be
relatively
meritorious.
immediately
But
start up
right
another
now,
one
at
that is
this point, I
dedicated to
cannot
just
imagine
the
expanding that. I'd yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the
just
gentleman from
the
Texas. And to that, I would add, I
just the
think,
Eastman brief.
again, I
Let's do
missed
that.
the very
Let's
first
do
part of this
that.
discussion, including the
Awesome.
sponsor's
Thank you so much.
discussion.
That's
But what I
great.
can't understand is what
All right,
is
my dog
currently
is
not
saying,
in
I'm
the
sorry, but
definition of
I have to pee.
foreign
And so
intelligence
I will take the dog
information
out and I will be
that
back.
has, in
Enjoy.
some identifiable way limited the ability of the intelligence
Oh,
community to
great.
protect the
Wonderful.
United States.
Thank you.
So like what was just said about COVID, if it were something designed to be a weapon by the Chinese Communist government, it's clearly within the existing definition. If it's just something, everything piece involving research around the world about coronaviruses, that's too broad, and it presents hazard simply by its breadth.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized. Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add, it's true that a 702 inquiry on a foreign person may put some of my records in the legal possession of the FBI, but that doesn't give them the right to then rifle through those records without a warrant, in my opinion. I agree with Mr. Swalwell that there's no question that the FBI has been on its best behavior since its abuses came to light, but I'm deeply skeptical that this is in response to any directives or internal reforms or sudden reformation within the agencies, because they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And we need to remember that their abuses didn't come to light easily. It required multiple inspector general reports, years of congressional hearings. So of course they're on their best behavior because they're under intense public scrutiny. The question before us is what happens when that intense public scrutiny fades away to other issues. Having seriously abused this authority once, there's every reason to believe they'll do so again. That's why we're adopting this law, to restore a bedrock constitutional principle. We created government to protect us from those who would do us harm. But the founders also recognized that in doing that, we had to protect ourselves against abuses by that government. That's why we have a Bill of Rights, and that's why we have a Fourth Amendment. And that Fourth Amendment says if you want to go through my stuff, including my phone records, you've got to get a warrant. That standard served us well, and that this law will put it back in place in this era of digital communications. I'm concerned that this amendment opens up so many potential loopholes as to invite a return to these abuses. I just posed this question before. Imagine how safe we would be if we stationed a soldier in every home. But we have a Third Amendment to protect us from this injustice, just as we have a Fourth Amendment to protect us from warrantless search.
The gentleman yield.
I'll yield to the gentleman from California.
The gentleman brings up a very good point, and I want to thank the gentleman from North Carolina and the gentlelady from Wyoming for what they've done to bring this to light. I do think that there's a legitimate reason for this committee at some future time to look at the executive orders implementing FISA, which is what we're really doing, is codifying a presidential interpretation of the law and then expanding that definition to match his or her interpretation. And I think the gentleman's making a very good point, which is there is no limit to what our agencies, foreign agencies, can spy. They can spy anywhere, anytime, on anything. We are only dealing with the look back to American citizens as we speak. And so I think the idea that we would willfully expand to a new definition at this point would seem to be an expansion that has no stated purpose. If the administration believes that these are fair implementations of the original language, we need not codify. And if at some future time, and that future time could be sooner rather than later, we evaluated it, I'm sure the administration would happily accept an expansion of their definition. And so I thank the gentleman from California, because if not for this dialogue, I too was willing to say, oh, we're only codifying the reality of an executive order. I now see that is a likely expansion beyond the scope of the original language and not appropriate to reining in known abuses. So again, I want to thank the gentleman from North Carolina and also the gentlelady from Wyoming.
And I yield to the gentleman from New Jersey.
I just want to associate myself with the gentleman from California, the gentleman from Texas, and the gentleman from North Carolina. Again, let's be clear. This amendment brings us back a step. We're doing legislation at a bipartisan level to ensure the safety of Americans' freedom, their First Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment rights. And this legislation, by broadening the scope, actually makes it worse. It would be ironic And quite frankly, in plain language, would be horrible if we did an amendment to legislation that brings us to a better place that actually undoes the purpose of the legislation. I yield back.
Whoa,
Yield
I
back.
heard something really
Gentleman from
weird
California yields back. Who seeks
in
recognition?
the microphone
Gentleman from Florida
when I was walking in. Isn't that weird?
seeks recognition. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it.
Uh-oh. Well, sorry, Eric.
Who seeks
Recorded vote, please.
Sorry, Eric.
being requested by the sponsor of the amendment? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Biggs?
They're just doing it because they don't like
Mr.
Eric.
Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye.
Oh.
Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparts? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
Gary Lake commented on Nikki Haley's chances
Mr.
of
Armstrong votes
becoming
no.
Trump's favorite.
Mr. Gooden?
Who's up next?
Can't wait.
Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels?
Oh,
Mr. Nels
please.
votes no. Mr. Moore?
What?
Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran?
Jesus Christ.
Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you,
Mr. Fry?
Kathy. Kevin McCarthy will
Mr. Nadler?
retire from Congress
Mr.
at the
Nadler
end of
votes
this
aye.
year,
Ms.
according to the
Lofgren?
Washington Post.
Ms. Jackson
Or at the
Lee?
end of his term. Is that what he said? Sorry.
Mr. Cohen?
At the end of the year. Oh.
Mr.
okay.
Johnson?
Spend more time with
Mr.
his
Schiff?
family.
Mr. Schiff votes
Extinction
aye.
level event.
Mr.
Yeah.
Swalwell? Mr. Swalwell votes aye.
Yeah.
Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal?
Those chickens.
Mr. Correa?
are coming
Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms.
home.
Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Naguse?
Those
Ms. McBath?
chickens are coming home.
Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush?
Trojan horse.
Mr. Ivy?
No.
Mr. Ivy votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye.
You can't lie your way anymore.
Gentleman from Texas is good.
Mr. Gooden votes no.
Anyone?
You can't hide anymore. Wow. Special election. Get busy, Bakersfield. Get busy, Bakersfield.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 9 ayes and 20 noes.
Oh, no.
The amendment is not agreed to. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6570.
Without objection, the
Mr.
amendment-
Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
the amendment will be considered as read.
That's
The
all,
point of order
folks.
reserved by the gentleman from California. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized to speak on his amendment.
24.
I
It's
thank
like
the
the
chair,
countdown
and
to
Mr. Chairman,
Christmas.
first I want to
Okay,
thank you
that's just
and
like the
Mr.
countdown to
Biggs and
Christmas.
the others who have worked on this. I think
We're
it is
going to have an
absolutely essential
old-fashioned
that
Christmas
we
here with an
find
extinction level
ways to
event
balance the interests
called
of
Kevin.
protecting Americans from threats as well as
Kevin's going home to be with his
Americans'
family as
constitutional
he
rights.
looks at the twilight years
And an
of
expansion
a
of those
career
constitutional rights is appropriate.
studded
As most members of this committee did
with crap.
5 years ago, I voted against a clean reauthorization of FISA. I thought that we needed reforms.
there a
This
link?
bill
Oh,
addresses
that's
many
right. God
important
damn it.
reforms. I believe in
saw
some
that as I was
respects
falling asleep. Hold on,
goes
let me
too
check.
far, and I would like to offer a few
damn.
amendments, starting with this one. This amendment,
Now I have
I
to.
think I can best point out the need for this amendment by
Hold on, everybody.
describing
I wonder if it's at 10:30. So much
a
to do today.
situation,
Yikes.
hypothetical
Yikes.
situation. A suspected
Uh,
member of the Sinaloa
Colorado.
cartel crosses the southern border, claims asylum, and is released into the country.
Is
The
it?
Federal Bureau of Investigation is monitoring the cartel's communications and catches them communicating with the asylee.
Page 15, line 1 through page 16, line 15 of this bill requires that the FISA court appoint an amicus to oversee the application process in favor of the subject of surveillance, a privilege that is not granted to American citizens when law enforcement is seeking a warrant domestically within the U.S. court system. The amicus delays the applicant's consideration for a year, and the asylee assists his fellow criminals in getting thousands of pounds of fentanyl over the southern border, killing untold numbers of American children.
I remember.
This is a real national security threat that Section 702 allowed federal law enforcement to stop, but this bill would have inadvertently, and I am not questioning the intentions of my friends on this committee, but inadvertently assisted the cartel member in continuing the drug trade. I know that my colleagues have good intentions with the amici provision of this bill, but its side effects will cause real harm to American citizens. We have to ask ourselves if we want to support Americans with real reform or embolden our enemies with a one-size-fits-all language. Over the past 3 years, the crisis at the American southern border has escalated into a catastrophe. Our nation's security, the health and safety of its youth, our culture, and our very future are at stake. Throughout the proposed legislation requires the appointment of an amicus curiae for all FISA court proceedings. It sounds like a great victory for transparency until you realize
oral
that
arguments
amici in
in the
all
case
FISA
at 3
court
p.m.
proceedings
Eastern
includes
Time
those
today,
that are meant
12
to
p.m.
target human
Pacific
trafficking,
Time, and it will be streamed
cartels,
live
and
on
foreign
CBS News.
terrorists.
Oh, sweet.
This bill states
Okay,
that an
so I
amicus
will,
must be
oh boy.
appointed where
Yeah, I'm
there are
definitely going to come
sensitive
back for that.
investigatory matters at hand, when new and existing
Oh,
programs and
there's just so much to
technologies
do. We're
request
going to have to,
approval, when
we're gonna have to
programmatic
kind of like,
surveillance is reauthorized, and other such exceptions. These
think
amicus
ourselves a little bit.
requirements
We've got a lot
extend
to
to
do.
non-citizens.
Okay.
They cover applications by the
Fentanyl.
FBI,
Fentanyl. It took a minute.
CIA,
It
and
took a minute for
DOJ
that to be
when
mentioned in
seeking to
this.
root out terrorists,
Yes,
coyotes,
we
and drug
can.
traffickers. I propose
Yes,
amending the
we
first sentence,
can. I
giving
know,
the court
McHenry
discretion by
stepped
changing
down
shall
too.
to may. After
I
all, the
don't
court knows
know. I'm
best
not
when a
feeling
helping
like it's
hand
going to
is
go that way.
necessary. I'm also
I
offering
think
to
they're
amend
going to
the
let the
language of this
voters
proposed bill
decide,
to make it explicitly clear that amici are
which is
only
kind of amazing
allowed when a
given that
U.S.
so
citizen is
many
targeted in some
worked hard
way
to make
by the
sure that
FISA
voters
application.
weren't
It would add the
deciding.
language targets a U.S. person 7 times
Anyway,
to
yes, I'm
ensure
going to
that
set
the
up
courts only
a
appoint amici
stream
to
for
cases
the
that involve the
kid.
targeting of Americans. I ask and encourage my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
When yields back, the gentleman from California
Sorry, I
withdraws his
spoke over that entire thing.
point of order.
I withdraw my point of order.
And the gentleman from New York, the ranking member, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must oppose this amendment. This language further reduces the amicus curiae's ability to engage in these proceedings, further limiting the types of cases in which their appointment will be sought. We have, in negotiating this bill, we have very carefully considered how these amici should be involved to ensure that civil liberties concerns are fully addressed in these often very secretive proceedings. All this language is carefully crafted to ensure our civil liberties can be represented by amici in a constitutional manner. This limitation goes against our bipartisan agreement in this bill, and I therefore must oppose it and urge my colleagues to oppose it as well.
Will the ranking member yield?
I'll yield.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so I have a great title.
The ranking member is correct.
I have a
that
great title.
this, perhaps may
I
go
don't think
against
they.
what was agreed
Oh,
upon
yeah. I
between
just
the
don't think they're going to
majority
kick him off,
and the
Max.
minority. However,
My title,
the
I
chairman
want
did
to
agree
be like this is The
to
Bachelor,
support the
right? And
amendment that I had
Colorado's giving
offered
out the
earlier.
roses.
And then, as you
And
saw,
it's like a
when it
rose
came up for a
ceremony.
vote,
That's what it is.
he
Okay,
voted
that's
against
what I
it.
needed.
And I would
Okay.
just
Excuse me, I voted for your amendment.
I couldn't remember.
know the chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You'll be the chairman again soon, but
I'm sorry.
not right now. And so, Mr. Ranking Member, I just want to point out to my colleagues, that's who we're doing this deal with, is somebody who would tell you something in private that he's going to support your amendment and then back off his support publicly. And that's why I'm just concerned in general that their concerns about 702 and privacy are not our legitimate concerns.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll yield to the gentleman.
Yeah, I know the gentleman didn't intend to say that, but there was a lively debate, and many of us who were tending to be a yes.
He agreed to vote for it.
You know, many of us who were tending to be a yes were persuaded to change. I would hope that we all would respect that debate here in the body and additional understanding can cause a change, and we're not bound by a commitment.
Well,
a
Should be bound
commitment-
by commitments. That's what a commitment is.
I would suggest that the gentleman at least
Okay, not bound by commitments. That's the Republican majority. There you go.
Reclaiming my time, I think this discussion is a little fruitless. And I just want to reiterate my opposition to this amendment for the reasons I stated, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Whoops.
I've reviewed the amendment of Mr. Buck, my friend from Colorado. I think his motivations and intentions are sincere. I do think that it undermines a bit the joint effort that we've made and the care that we've done in drafting this piece of legislation. And so I regretfully must oppose it, even though I know he's trying to make the bill better.
I know.
I will say,
oh my God, that was so sad.
with regard to the point raised by the
101.
gentleman from California just a moment
Mary Hartman
ago,
was his best show. I agree. Mary Hartman.
did.
Mary Hartman.
You kept your commitment.
I made a commitment. I
Oh my
accepted
God,
it
that was so
publicly.
good.
Thank you.
And
get back here.
as the debate went on, I grew skeptical, but nonetheless kept the commitment. I think
Extinction level of
we should not impugn each other.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
we
As
all
dinosaurs,
need
we need to keep aware of
to
those
step
kind of
back and
things.
realize because I think your
I hope they
motivations
don't.
were sincere as well. But
They
I
haven't been
don't think
really
that we
known
should
to
impugn
like
each other. I think we should
do a
look-
very well
if we really want
organized
to try to make the bill
uprising.
better, let's try to make it better.
I mean, January 6th had a lot of hype, and
Comfortable
still
with
it
it, we
was
should
a bit of a
we
shit
should go
show.
forward with it. I know my friend from Colorado, who wants me to yield to him, which I will yield to him in just a sec, is very sincere in his attempts to make the bill better as well. And with that, I'm going to
know.
yield to the gentleman from
Yeah,
Colorado.
outs them. Yeah.
I thank
I
my
get
friend
it,
for
Bob.
yielding. I'm missing something here.
Yeah.
There were great discussions between
Mhm.
Republicans and Democrats to come up with a compromise for this bill. Just like the last amendment, people were swayed by the points that were
Yeah.
made during the argument. And my point is that there is a hole in this bill, and it may have been a compromise between Republicans and Democrats.
This is going to be.
We do not want to mandate, and that's what this does, is
It's going to get
mandate.
weirder.
And all I'm suggesting is that at any point in time, the court
Please
can
protect
request
your
that an amicus
psyche
be appointed in a particular case
as much as
at any
possible.
point in time. But this bill mandates that an amicus be appointed in a particular case. And that's where the problem is. It's being mandated, and that mandate
We're still talking about
goes,
702.
or I should say, part of the mandate is a delay in the process. And when we're talking about a Chinese spy, when we're talking about a cartel member, when we're talking about dangerous drugs in this country, there should be no delay in the process. And so I oppose the mandate. I absolutely am in favor of the court having the ability to appoint. But we should remember something. An amicus curiae is a friend of the court, not an enemy of the government, not a representative of a particular person, but a friend of the court. And the friend of the court is appointed by the court, and we should give the court discretion to do that.
Would the
So
gentleman yield?
I yield back to my friend from Arizona.
Mr. Biggs.
Mr.
Mr. Biggs.
Chairman, yield?
Gentleman from Arizona yields. Gentleman's recognized. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. I just want to point out that what this bill says is that an amicus shall be appointed unless the court issues a finding that appointment is not appropriate.
It is our friend
So
Jerry.
that provision
I
is
love
in
you, but
the
can you
bill.
sit up?
That's on page 15 of the bill, if
So
anybody's
don't
interested in reading it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona.
Forgive me.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
No fights today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the ranking member's point, I was going
What?
to inquire to the gentleman from Colorado with respect to that language on 15 lines 8 and 9, unless the court issues a finding that appointment is not appropriate.
Lying.
Is it the gentleman's view, which
That
I
the
think does
amicus
capture the may,
clause-
so in the effort to strike shall and replace it with may.
Congrats.
But if you don't do that,
We did
it
it.
seems to me
We
that
just
the
invented it.
language that the ranking
We did
member
it.
just read
We did
does take
Boo.
care of that, but I wanted to give the gentleman
Hey,
a chance
Paul, how are you doing?
to express his view on how that language would work.
And I'm looking specifically, but I believe the bill requires the court to find certain exceptions in order to not appoint.
And what I'm doing is just giving the court more discretion beyond those exceptions. And again, we're not talking about a United States citizen. We're talking about someone who comes into this, it may involve others, but a cartel member, a spy, those folks, those individuals should not receive the protection of an amicus as a requirement for this to go forward. And that's my only point.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will yield back to the gentleman.
And I will yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. So when you look at lines 8 through 15, page
Carter
15,
is so funny
it says
on Twitter.
They shall appoint unless the court issues a finding that the appointment is not appropriate. And then you go down and it says, it gives the criterion who they're going to appoint. Going to appoint one or more individuals.
I was thinking to myself, shouldn't this be in the judicial? Oh yeah.
Unless the court finds that such qualification is inappropriate. There's no.
Thought I was in the foreign relations. I don't know what I'm
additional
doing.
requirement. It is that the court finds that it is inappropriate. And so they can issue, but they have to issue a finding. They're issuing it in writing. I would point out that other provisions of this bill, which include legislative
He knows
oversight
he's
of
leaving,
these
or I mean, he
hearings,
knows
but
he's.
also,
I know how.
I
think Kevin
believe
knows all his
deal with
protectors
exigent
are now going to
circumstances,
be.
or when you need to deal with it alacrity, you're going to have more people watching. I think the court's going to respond appropriately
the book
because of
thrown
that.
at them.
But in this particular instance, the ranking member was correct that it's up to the court. I mean, they shall, but if they find it's inappropriate for whatever reason, such as you have a drug dealer or something like that, that you're trying to take care of.
Oh my God. Can we read this to you
All right,
guys?
and reclaiming my time.
Yeah,
the
they're all
follow-up question,
weaponization
and I
committees now.
think
This is
the
the,
gentleman
this
from
is
Colorado
the statement. Yes.
discussed this as well, but targets a United States person
Okay.
and
So
is
11
the-
minutes ago, Marjorie
sense
Taylor
there
Greene
that
goes, well,
the language in
now
the
in 2024, we
current
will have
language
is
is
one
overbroad
seat
in some way and
majority
needs to
in
be
the House of
restricted
Representatives. Congratulations, Freedom Caucus.
because it
For
could go
one
beyond.
105 rep.
I
who
guess
would
the
spell our
point
own for
would
the
be there's a
oven.
potential
I
that
can
an
assure
amicus
you,
under
Republican voters
current
didn't give us the
language
majority to
could be
crash the
appointed,
ship.
even if it doesn't involve
Hopefully no
a
one
person
dies.
who is a United States person as the target. So
sorry, I
the idea,
didn't
this is the question, is to limit the scope of it so that it only targets
Yeah, I'm done.
United States.
I'm sorry. Brian Glenn
citizens.
liked it. I'm going to keep that.
If the,
Tim Tim liked it.
will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
If the
Wait, I
purpose
didn't do
of the application is to target a United States citizen, this
I'm a no.
section would apply. If
Oh.
it is not targeting a United States citizen, then this section would not apply. And so in my hypothetical, where a cartel member crosses into the United States and receives, because it's unknown to the government that the person is part of a cartel, receives legal status in this
There, I just
country,
posted it
this
on the
section,
Twitter.
the court would not have to find one of these exceptions. If the court doesn't find one of the exceptions on page, bottom of page 15 and the top of page 16, the court must appoint, shall appoint an amicus. And that's my objection to this. I want to give the court the discretion. So often the court is reviewing the same type of application and doesn't need a friend of the court to assist the court. And that delay in requiring an amicus to be appointed is what I'm trying to avoid with this amendment. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Sarah, Bill Barr must be in charge for this hearing because that amicus friend of the court BS
view
thing
the
is his
first
same way to weigh in on a
clause
decision
of
that
the
didn't go
amendment
his
offered by
way and
the
get
gentleman
them
from
in
Colorado,
rolling.
Michelle,
He did it with Ruby Ridge. Oh, thank
strike
you,
shall
Sarah.
and insert may as kind of converting this to an opt-in versus an opt-out effectively. We're probably quibbling. I think the same result will be reached either way. I probably prefer that it be effectively an opt-out. In other words, you stipulate that you should have the amicus and then create, and then offer the reasons why you shouldn't. I think that is a better place to be for what we're trying to achieve in holding the court accountable to preserve and protect civil liberties. I think it would still achieve the objective of the gentleman from Colorado. I could support the amendment if that first line were removed. And if you're just trying to clarify, I think I could. I mean, subject to current further debate.
Wow,
If
Chip.
all you're trying
I
to
won't
do-
hold you to that
Did
commitment.
your mom tell you?
Well,
to-
I want to, in light of the previous statements, I want to be
understand
careful
it.
about what I'm committing to. But for the remainder of the lines about the striking, presents, and inserting targets U.S. person, I could probably get comfortable with that to be very clear that you're talking about targeting U.S. persons. But I can't support it in its current form with the may, eliminating shall to a may. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Question occurs on the amendment from the gentleman from Colorado. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the chair, the noes have it.
Recorded vote.
A recorded vote being requested. The clerk call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Isa? Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates
Mr.
votes
Isa is
no.
pooping.
Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock?
McClintock.
Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no.
I know it's
Mr.
McLeod.
Massey? Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy?
Mr.
Mr. Roy
Massive
votes
asshole
no.
votes
Mr.
no.
Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparks? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
Oh, here we
Mr.
go.
Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman?
Sorry,
Ms. Hageman
this
votes
is
no.
me being high.
Mr.
Come on,
Moran?
Max, you know me. I got
Ms. Lee?
confused when I scheduled
Ms.
it,
Lee
and I
votes
can't
aye.
change it right at the
Mr. Hunt?
moment. But
Mr.
yeah,
Fry?
well,
Mr.
and
Fry votes
technically
no.
we did start
Mr.
in the Senate
Nadler?
hearing, but it wasn't
Mr.
about
Nadler
red.
votes
That was
no.
about finance.
Ms.
So yeah,
Lofgren?
I'm a little fucked up this morning, but it's
Ms.
just
Jackson
because
Lee?
well, maybe when I
Mr. Cohen?
set it up.
Mr. Johnson?
I was probably
Mr.
high.
Johnson votes
I mean,
aye.
you know, I'm just
Mr.
gonna guess.
Schiff? Mr. Swallow? Mr. Swallow votes aye. Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy?
No.
Mr. Ivy votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no.
And everybody has to come back and be. This is your actual job, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually your job.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 ayes and 22 noes.
The amendment is not adopted.
You are defeated.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Andy, I lost
I have
my
an amendment
keys
at
in
the
the
desk.
bathroom.
Clerk will
Biggs.
report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR
Without objection,
65.
the amendment will be read, will be considered as read.
Oh,
Excuse me, and the
Mr.
gentlelady-
Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
gentlelady from Florida reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm offering this amendment on behalf of our colleague, Representative Lofgren, who is a leading voice on civil liberties and government surveillance issues in Congress. Unfortunately, she can't be here today.
Really? He's saying
She
that
has
nice stuff
expressed
about her?
support for the underlying legislation. She expressed support and encouraged this amendment be
Wow.
offered. And deference and respect to her, I am offering this amendment, and the substance of it, I agree with, but as I will explain. The amendment would require the government to secure a warrant before searching for information on U.S. persons and data collected under programs authorized by Executive Order 12333. Representative Lofgren is the Democrat lead of the bipartisan bicameral Government Surveillance Reform Act, legislation which lays out comprehensive reforms to surveillance programs across the federal government. That bill, of which I am a co-sponsor, has provided members of this committee with a North Star when considering the best approaches to reauthorizing Section 702. Due to its comprehensive nature, many of its reform proposals are beyond the scope of the legislative jurisdiction of this committee or are not germane to the text under consideration today. In addition to requiring the government to secure a search warrant for information in the 702 database, the GSRA also includes a warrant requirement for government queries of U.S. persons and data collected under EO 12333 programs. EO 12333, which has been on the books since the early Reagan administration, has been a key tool for the intelligence community's data collection and retention programs. While data collected under 12333 presents many of the same challenges as data collected under Section 702 of FISA, including the incidental collection of U.S. persons data, programs under 12333 lack the congressional and judicial oversight mechanisms that I would like to see and which are needed to ensure that the civil liberties of Americans are protected. Concerns exist that if common sense limits are placed on the FBI's ability to conduct backdoor searches of 702 data, agencies may shift their unconstitutional searches of Americans' information to programs that lack congressional oversight. These are not idle concerns. As Patrick Eddington of the Cato Institute pointed out a few weeks ago in an op-ed, years before the 702 program was authorized, quote, the Central Intelligence Agency was apparently conducting exactly the kind of an internet backbone surveillance now carried out under FISA Section 702 with absolutely no judicial oversight. Close quote. Mr.
After they
Chairman,
voted to take my health care more than so many times, I have some doubts whether the GOP-led committees have Americans' best interest in mind or should be having
capturing
hearings like
Americans'
this right now.
communications.
Maybe the Senate and the House should reach
The
a better
information
agreement
came to
after
light following
February
a Cato lawsuit
2024.
under the Freedom of Information
Oh my
Act, which
God,
revealed that a
this is bad.
CIA program operating during the 90s captured and retained U.S. persons' data seemingly indefinitely, and that retention was not necessarily tied to any actual terrorist threat or espionage investigation. This underlying amendment would ensure that Americans' Fourth Amendment rights are protected no matter what database intelligence agencies are utilizing. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important effort championed by Representative Lofgren and also our friends in the Senate, Senator Wyden and Senator Mike Lee, and also our colleague in the House, Representative Warren Davidson. As I am aware of the germaneness concerns with this amendment, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for letting me raise this, and I will now withdraw it from further consideration, and I yield back.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. Who seeks recognition? Mr. Bishop. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Or do you have an amendment at the desk?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman has an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by Mr. Bishop of
Without
North
objection, the
Carolina.
amendment will be considered as read. Point of order reserved by the gentleman from Arizona. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
The warrant requirement in the bill, Mr. Chairman, and I'm trying to lay my hands, I got very little notice we were doing this next. The warrant requirement, as currently drafted in the ANS, provides that the warrant will be one that covers the period of the query, but it could be a warrant totally unrelated to a FISA a FISA Section 702 database query. This language, the modification, it says instead of covering the period of the query, just substitutes the language, a warrant authorizing the conduct of the query. So it's straightforward. It says that what we're after is, in fact, to have a court warrant that says probable cause being established, you may search 702 database. So it's pretty straightforward, simple. I think the very idea here is we've got broad agreement that there should be a warrant obtained in order to search 702 database. This language would simply achieve that, as opposed to a broader situation where any warrant obtained against a person could then be converted to use of this particular database.
Gentlemen yield?
That I yield. Yeah.
Gentlemen yield?
Yeah, I'll yield to the chairman for
I
comment.
think it's a clarification that's fine. I'll talk with the ranking member too, but I think that's fine. I yield back to the gentleman.
You yield, Mr. Chairman?
I yield to, I guess, Mr. Tiffany first.
If you'd be so kind, the gentleman from North Carolina, would you read at least the full sentence again and how that is constructed in the context that it's in? I would just like to hear that one more time.
That is my objective.
To try to understand.
Right now. In the meantime, perhaps, Mr. Tiffany, if I yield to Mr. Biggs for his question while we're trying to get my hands on that. Actually, I think I've got it. Is it, am I in the right place? No. Go ahead, Mr. Biggs. I yield to you, and then we'll find the place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this amendment is fine. And the way it reads is, pursuant to the federal rules of criminal procedure by a court of competent jurisdiction authorizing the conduct of the query. I think that's appropriate and a good change. And
Would the gentleman yield?
I think, Mr. Biggs, I'm going to get
Gentleman
Mr.
yield.
Tiffany's concern real quick, and then I'll come to the ranking member if I could. Sorry, we're a little disorganized here. This is on page 4 of the ANS.
Right.
And the appropriate language is that subparagraph A shall not apply to a query related to a United States person or a person reasonably believed to be located in the United States at the time of the query or the time of the communication or creation of the information if, and this is a disjunctive thing, such person is the subject of an order or emergency authorization authorizing electronic surveillance or physical search under section 105 or section 304 of this act.
Sorry.
Or
Had to bring
a
coffee.
warrant issued pursuant to the
Had to
federal
bring
rules of
coffee to
criminal
Bobo.
procedure by a
Had to bring
court
coffee
of
to Bobo.
competent jurisdiction covering, authorizing the conduct of the query. And with that, I'll yield to the ranking member.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just wanted to say, I think the
Oh my
amendment's fine.
gosh.
I urge its adoption.
Thank you, sir. And with that,
Question,
I yield back.
gentleman yields back. One seeks recognition. The question, gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so that I'm clear, I asked my colleague from North Carolina, authorizing the conduct of the query, I take it references the court referenced in line 20, covering the period of the query, which is the current language. So let me phrase it this way. I took the language covering the period of the query to be addressing a time frame, so that's not an unlimited period of time where this exception could be applied. And I took the gentleman's language to reference the court that would have provided the authorization. So to me, they seem to be talking about potentially two different things. And I'll yield to the gentleman to get his guidance on what his interpretation of that is.
I thank the gentleman, and I'm not 100% sure I'm following what you're saying, but because the first thing that hung me up is I think the phrase covering, where's my new language? Authorizing the conduct of the query. I think that phrase modifies warrant, not court. So a warrant issued pursuant to the rules of criminal procedure by a court of competent jurisdiction authorizing the conduct of the query. It's eluding me. Perhaps you try one more time. I don't see what the covering of the period of the query helps with, and I'm open to that language being included also, but the key for me is that the court's warrant needs to be a warrant that is, we ask for warrants, as you know, others may not. We require things to be searched to be described with reasonable particularity. And I'm not suggesting this is a constitutional requirement. We're fixing something by statute we think should prudentially be fixed. But that's what I'm saying. We want to make sure this warrant is specific to searching the 702 database. So when I say authorizing the query, it is the 702 query. Now, if the gentleman believes something else is needed there, that I'm losing something
just
by
made up a
dropping the
thing.
language,
Rocky
I don't know
Mountain
what the language
botular.
covering the period of the query means.
Exactly. If I might reclaim my time, that's a fair point, I took it to go to staleness essentially. And just thinking out loud, I suppose that the provisions
just wants to
referenced
write his own
under the
story,
Federal Rules of
guys.
Criminal Procedure
Don't be so
contain
hard on
staleness
it.
provisions. But I just wanted to make sure I understood that the gentleman had time, there's still going to be language that has time constraints on this
More
particular
importantly.
warrant. In other words, months down the road, whatever the warrant was shouldn't still justify something.
And I think to the gentleman's point, I believe, although I didn't practice in this area, I believe that the general requirements of probable cause and the issuance of a warrant under general law would cover the concept of staleness as you've just suggested. I don't know that you can have a warrant issued and then leave it outstanding forever and then have law enforcement rely on it as the basis to do any search.
Think about who said this. You put everything
Since
in
we're
your
trying to
pocket
fix
and then
something
you
that's
forget
not
about
really
it.
constitutionally required, we ought to
That's
have
what
both
happens.
here to try to fix that too, but it gets pretty difficult. I think what I know we're trying to do is to make sure the court is required to have a warrant before we can use 702 data. There's a staleness issue. Maybe it seems to me more, a more remote or more difficult problem maybe to solve if you're going to go back and try to resolve all warrant law, I yield.
Fair enough, reclaiming my time. Well, let me open this up generally then. Is there anyone perhaps who was in the negotiations with respect to this at the subcommittee level who understands or has a sense or guide or could provide guidance on the covering the period of the query language? I mean, if I'm incorrect about a time constraint, that's fine, but I do want to make sure we're not striking language that might still be useful.
The gentleman yield.
I will yield.
I had the same concerns you did initially, but reading it again as it applies to the warrant, what you're talking about is making sure that the period of the warrant covers.
So is this just the way they act when they're in
period
like
of the query? So you're capturing that one point
discussing
within the
bill
warrant
language?
timeframe. It has nothing to do with the actual
Because they're so
timeframe
much
of the
nicer
warrant
without
itself, like the beginning and the end of the warrant. It's just making sure that during that window.
surprised this
cover
isn't
the
as much of a show as the other ones are, I
Does that
guess.
make sense? I mean, I was where you were, but I now understand why that language can be replaced by authorizing the conduct. It's actually more.
I'll reclaim, and I apologize to the
Fine,
chair for
you're
running
fine.
over, but the only concern I would have about that is that the warrant, the scope of the query would be based on the warrant. In other words, so the two of them are linked together. So, but with that, my time has expired, and I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
I yield to Mr. Biggs.
Thanks. I'm going to see if I can help. I don't know if I can. I'm going to try.
I mean, it is.
But
No, it's absolutely.
I take
this is,
that language as kind of a
I
drafting, trying to
wish
find some
that
drafting
all the
consistency
hearings
because
had
it
this
refers
tone and tenor,
ultimately
frankly.
here to
So,
line 7,
I don't
well,
wanna
actually
say
lines
it too
11 through
loud.
13, where we're speaking on that same
Lest we
page,
have a
page
fist
4,
fight.
where we're speaking
Drinking the
to,
dice.
let's take it from 7. Subparagraph A shall not apply to a query related to a U.S. person or person reasonably believed to be located in the United States at the time of the query or the time of the communication or creation of the information if, and then it goes through, and then it ends up saying covering the period of the query. I
Actually,
think that
yeah,
was,
that's right.
I
Like
would
Jim said,
suggest,
too. We're watching him work
I
and we're
don't
watching
know,
him make the
I
sausage.
didn't
and
draft
he
that, but I
says,
would
this is the
suggest
fight over
when I reviewed
semantics,
it, that
which makes our bills
it was
so difficult to
making
read and
consistent with the
interpret
timing
when the law
is in
inevitably goes in
lines,
front of a
7
judge.
through 13.
Excellent.
And where that's why I don't have a problem with
Thank
the
you, Joe.
authorizing the conduct of the
He's going to
query
be the
because I think
dictator. Yeah,
it's
just on day
actually
one. Yeah,
inclusive
I don't think he
of what you're
understands
trying
what
to
that
get at,
means,
and
but
perhaps maybe even makes it more
or
focused. That's
perhaps
just,
he does. Maybe
so I'll yield back.
I'm
Gentleman yields back.
misunderstanding. Yeah,
Gentleman from
I don't
Florida
know.
yields back.
I don't know.
Anyone seek recognition on the amendment?
No? You all done?
Question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Kentucky.
Have an
I
amendment.
hate this guy.
Desk clerk report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Kentucky is
Oh, he didn't jump
recognized to offer his amendment. The gentleman from Arizona reserves a point
of order.
Reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I'm honored to offer this amendment with
oft
Ms.
honored
Jayapal as a
this amendment.
co-sponsor. And Ms. Lofgren, I want to give her credit as the
Wow.
original author of this. She's been diligent. She's been on top of this FISA issue for over
This
a
is all we
decade
want.
since I've
This is
the
all we
entire
want.
time that I've been here. And Ms. Lofgren
mean,
and I have
not
worked
that,
together
the
on
outcomes have
amendments.
to actually, I mean, what we want
over
is
the
good
years.
outcomes
Some of them we've got
for the-
passed on the floor.
for the populace. However,
as Ms. Jayapal said
while we
earlier,
get there-
pretty excited. Never thought we would really get to the point that we are.
This
Thank
is
you, Mr. Biggs.
what I would like to
in
see
terms
us-
of getting real reforms and not trying to last
It doesn't
minute
have to be
offer
fake. It just has to be
defunding
like,
amendments
let's get the
on
work done.
appropriations
Let's get the
bills.
work
We are
done.
here in the Committee of Jurisdiction offering
Let's have
substantial
good
legislation
ideological
that's going
arguments,
to
but
last the
let's
entire
get the work done.
reauthorization. So this amendment,
Sometimes
what
we'll
it
win
does
and sometimes we'll lose.
is
And I mean by
gives us
win
more
or lose that
transparency,
sometimes
and that's
things
going to
will
be
come out
key.
the way
If we're going to do our
that
jobs,
we
which is
believe is best
oversight
for
of this
people, and
entire
sometimes they
process
won't.
for the next several years, we need
And
oversight.
we have to
We
keep
need
fighting
the
so that
information.
everything
The
that
government's
doesn't come out
abuses
the
of
way it
Section
should
702 and other provisions of FISA
ultimately
came to light as a result of
changed
statutory reporting requirements,
it-
a statutory requirement that the government declassify and release FISA court opinions and inspector general audits. Without these enforced transparency and oversight
we just take all
mechanisms,
the money out of politics.
we would have no way and no opportunity
I
to
really
do
do.
what we're doing here today, enacting the
Figure out a
reforms
way to
needed
give them
stop these
airtime. I don't know
abuses.
how you do that,
Mr.
but
Biggs'
I don't
underlying
care.
bill already
Billionaires
has
can figure
several
that the fuck
excellent
out. They
provisions
can pay
related
for
to
it.
transparency, accountability, and oversight. Our amendment would
But
build on these provisions
have
with
it
some
so everybody
additional
can
audit
watch
and
them,
reporting requirements.
everybody can
These are
see,
common sense,
everybody
good
gets to
government
comment.
provisions.
That's it.
None of them creates any new restrictions on surveillance. They simply
Take
aid
the
in
money out.
ensuring that the existing rules are
Reverse
being
Citizens
complied with
United.
and that Americans have the basic information they need to understand the impact of the government's surveillance programs. First, our amendment requires an audit by relevant inspectors
And with that,
general of
I'm
agencies
going to
compliance with
die.
Attorney General approved procedures that govern the collection, dissemination, and retention of U.S. person information obtained outside of FISA. For instance, cell phone location information that intelligence agencies might purchase from data brokers. Although this bill restricts government purchases of many types of sensitive data, it doesn't completely prohibit all such purchases. And intelligence agencies may already have significant amounts of this data in their possession. It's important to ensure that any applicable restrictions on access to that data are being enforced. In addition, our amendment expands on existing reporting requirements to provide additional information to Congress
Okay,
and the
I'm gonna be
public.
honest
For
with
instance,
you,
it would
Paul.
remove the
This is
exception
what I
in
have
law that
assumed
currently
for
allows
quite
the
a number of
FBI
years. Now,
not to
am I happy
report the
about
number
it?
of U.S. person
Absolutely not.
queries it conducts. As
Absolutely
we
not.
know, the FBI has
And we
reported
should
this number for the
definitely have
last 2 years,
conversations about
and we
that.
want to
And we
make
should
sure this
definitely
continues.
limit
It would also
the rights
require
of
the Director of
government
National
to
Intelligence to
surveil
include some
its
additional information
citizens.
in
Absolutely.
his or her annual
But
statistical
I have always assumed that.
reports. Among other things, the DNI would be required to report
And I
information
have
about the
I have
subject matter of
equivocated it
Section
to that
702
scene in,
certifications,
I Know What You
which the
Did Last
government
Summer,
declassified this year for the first time.
when
The number
the
of people targeted
amazing
under each
Jennifer Love
certification
Hewitt
and
comes
the number
out
of
in a
intelligence
t-shirt
reports
after
that
being
contain U.S. person
pursued
identifiers
by
broken
a
down by
well,
whether the
t-shirt and
reports are
jeans.
derived from
She had
Section
all of her
702
clothes on.
collection or
But anyway, she
non-FISA
comes out in that
collection,
famous scene and
by
stands in
whether
the middle of the street
the
and whips her
identities
arms
are
open
masked
and says,
or not masked.
"What do you
There should be no objection to this reporting requirement.
come get me?
Um,
I'm right here."
requiring the government to provide this
So,
type of
I don't know
information
why
or to task
I
executive
talked
branch
about that, but
overseers
that
with
scene is
assessing
very
whether the
important in my
government is
life.
complying with procedures that govern
Put
its
it that
handling
way.
and use of sensitive
I highly recommend
information
that
about
movie. I don't know what the
Americans.
hate is.
In no way does this
I don't know.
provision
When do we get our Bill of Rights
limit our
restored?
government's ability to collect information, to review this
When do
information.
we
It's
get our rights
merely a
restored where
reporting
we don't have
requirement.
to
And again, offered by my,
trust that
authored by, first of all, my
what's his
colleague,
name?
Zoe
Cock
Lofgren, who has been
He's
fastidious
a
and
cock
diligent
is
on these these issues.
Running
With
our
that, I
lives.
yield back to balance my time.
I wouldn't trust this guy to
Gentleman
go
yields
get
back.
me a
The ranking
ball.
member is recognized.
Oh, no,
Withdraw
I
my
wouldn't.
I
No,
think-
I'd have it
Gentleman
tested.
withdraws point of order. The ranking member is recognized.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Extra
gentlemen.
easy.
When I hear legislative proposal described as common sense, I usually become very suspicious. But in this case, it is true.
Oh my God.
I want to thank Mr. Massey for offering this amendment. A central focus of our discussions today has been the vital need and previous lack of transparency in data and information collected by our nation's surveillance apparatus. When intelligence agencies work to gather information, it's our responsibility to ensure they do so in a way that respects the civil liberties and constitutional rights
Let me see if
of
there's
all U.S.
other,
persons. This is especially true when the collected data itself concerns American citizens. Mr. Massey's amendment would give us an important insight into the data collected by DNI. This will shed a light on proceedings in FISA courts and other surveillance mechanisms to ensure they are
Scott
fair and
McAfee's having
operating as they are
a criminal
intended.
trial, another one
The
that isn't
accountability
related
for a court
to
system
the
that is traditionally
Trump
operated without sufficient
issues, and it throws me off
transparency.
every time because I
support
see
the
him
amendment
live and I'm
and
like,
urge
what is?
everyone else to do so. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the sponsor, gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's a great amendment, and I'm going to just be quick and say, let's all vote for it, please.
Gentleman yields back.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to go here and then I'll come to you. Gentlelady
Thank
from
you.
Washington is recognized, then I'll come to you. Ms.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know what
I
we're
rise
gonna
in
do.
strong support of Mr. Massey's amendment to strengthen accountability and transparency over surveillance authorities. And I just want to take a minute to recognize how we got here, which is in part
This all
because
goes
we
back
had
to Snowden and the
transparency
info
and
he
accountability.
does it?
This bill is a critically important bill that would require the government to get a warrant before searching for Americans' communications.
Who was the guy
Because during the
before
last
Snowden?
702 reauthorization,
Wasn't
we
there
in
one
Congress
before him?
insisted that the intelligence community publicly report on surveillance targeting Americans. We had been told to stop asking for this warrant requirement. We were told not to worry about it. But we did, and we found out that the FBI alone made nearly 3.4 million queries of Americans just in 2021. 3.4 million warrantless searches on Americans. And thanks to that public accountability, the FBI then took steps to reduce warrantless U.S. person searches, resulting in the number, yes, dropping to over
I'm gonna be honest, I
204,000
would
in
have assumed,
2022.
and that was my
And while the
fault
FBI
for
and
being
others
stupid.
tout that
I
number
would have
to
assumed
push
that
for
you
FISA
had to have a
reauthorization
warrant,
with very few
even if
changes,
it was related
it is
to,
still a problem. We're talking about
you know,
over
you weren't the target of
500
the
warrantless searches
investigation,
of
but you
Americans
came up
every
in the
day.
search
That
of
means that
the
every 5 years, if
target's
that were to continue without any
communications. I
changes
would
that we're
think
proposing today, that means
I
that
would have
every 5
assumed
years, the
they got a
FBI would have
warrant.
conducted 1 million more
That's
of these
interesting.
warrantless searches, which
So-
is exactly why we're able to get to where we
I
got to,
understand.
because we got that information. So I've been very proud to work with members on the other side to crack down on these warrantless searches.
I guess I've never
And our
seen a
efforts are
hearing
really
quite like
impossible to
this
ignore because
in
we demanded
tone,
that
so I'm
transparency in
still kind of
2018. So this amendment allows us to
not used to it.
continue to conduct oversight over surveillance activities. It would strengthen the already excellent provisions in the bill on transparency, accountability, and oversight by requiring the DNI to report on certifications issued under Section 702, statistics on who is being targeted, the people that are being targeted, intelligence reports containing identifiers of U.S. persons. This is basic information. I think it's our job in Congress to know if intelligence investigations are having a disparate impact on constitutionally protected classes, whether it's based on race or religion or political views. Protecting our democracy is a duty that we all take seriously, and it cannot come at the cost of trampling foundational rights to privacy and civil liberties that are enshrined in our Constitution. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to stand up for the civil
Move
liberties
says
of our
or farther.
constituents, and
EO
that starts with
12333
doing the most
expanded
basic
for
oversight and transparency, requiring
GWOT. What
transparency
is that?
from the
Sorry.
intelligence
Government
community to ensure that those rights are
agencies without
protected and
Congress
upheld at every
involvement
turn.
for
So I
quite a
thank
while. That
Mr. Massey
makes,
for
yeah,
offering
it
the
makes
amendment and
sense.
allowing me to
This makes
co-sponsor it.
sense.
I thank
What's
Ms. Lofgren for her work
GWOT?
on it. And I thank all of our
The
colleagues for
important
just
Congress
continuing to
involvement, right?
have
Okay, I
this
understand.
very
Thank you.
good,
Thanks for that.
rational, reasonable discussion
Thanks for that.
towards the goals that we all are working for. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Maybe
As
I'm just
we,
happy
as,
that
the gentleman from Kentucky was
the
giving his
Republicans are
presentation on this amendment,
supportive
The thing that ran through my mind
not-
was
I mean,
cost
I'm not,
benefit
you know,
analysis.
whatever.
And
It's a
I
double-edged
think about
sword.
all the
Yeah, as
reports
most
that
things
we require to
need
be
to come
generated
out of that
here in the Congress of the
place.
United States.
Mr.
And I
Tiffany.
oftentimes question the value
Hi,
of
Mr.
those
Tiffany.
reports.
It's a nice Sprite
And
can you
so
have
I have a
there.
question for the gentleman from Kentucky, if he would
Having
be
a
so kind
Sprite.
as
Well,
to
it is
answer it is,
12:13.
you know, how do you answer that
Global.
question? Okay, here we get
Yes,
another
right.
report. Is it going to be of value?
Yes. Was
Is it going to be of value?
12333 expanded as a
Well,
part of
my
the Patriot
short
Act?
answer to
Forgive
that
me
is
for
what
being
price do you
not
place on civil
smart about
liberties?
this.
That's a rhetorical answer to a question that I think that these reports are only worthwhile if we read them. And I think we do get too many reports on things that we don't pay attention to. And
Don't
to
you
the
have
gentleman's
staff
point,
that at
I
least help
assure
you?
you that as long as I'm in
Okay, great.
Congress
Thank
and as
you.
long as
So it
Ms.
does trade,
Lofgren and Mr.
it dates
Jayapal
to
is
the
here, we
Patriot
are
Act.
going to be paying attention to these reports.
Do you think we take any of the agencies away from their duties by having them create another report, have more people that are creating reports?
I think if the result of having more reports is they do less spying on Americans without a warrant, then I would double the number of reports.
I yield back.
For what purpose, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Wow.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank
Will
you.
replace
I strongly support
McCarthy.
this
Did it?
bill.
No, I
and
didn't
I'm
hear
really proud
why
of
he's
this committee's
quitting.
ability to come together on a
Yeah, he's
bipartisan
quitting.
package to reform our government
It's in everything
surveillance
now.
techniques. I echo the comments of many of my colleagues. We need to reauthorize Section 702. We need this tool to prevent threats against the U.S. and to combat terrorism. But we also need constitutional guardrails. We need to respect the Fourth Amendment, and we need to protect Americans' privacy from government surveillance. This bill is a sensible package of reforms to bring government surveillance into compliance with the Constitution. It provides meaningful reforms to stop the abuse of surveillance authorities by the FBI and other agencies in our intelligence community.
Oh, little
It requires the
sassy,
intelligence
little
community
pleather.
to observe the
blazer.
constitutional dictates of the
quite
Fourth Amendment
sharp.
and seek probable cause before they look at Americans' data. So to me, these are very sensible reforms that should be the absolute minimum for any reauthorization of Section 702. And I'm really grateful to Mr. Massey. I think his amendment is a good addition to this bill, to the underlying bill, because as Ms. Jayapal just mentioned, many of the abuses that we seek to correct with this reform package were actually disclosed through some of the reporting requirements that Congress imposed in the past. So Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, I appreciate your work to put together a bipartisan
In other
bill that
words,
represents a
this is
consensus
why we're
between
here.
Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, this is a good
on
one. I don't
protecting
know.
Americans'
I
privacy,
imagine
and I yield
that
back.
has a lot to do
For what
with
purpose, the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the
his
last word.
decisions.
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, I would just like to offer my strong
I have a
support
feeling he's
for
implicated
this
somewhere
amendment offered
along
by
the food
the
chain.
gentleman from Kentucky and co-sponsored by Democrat
I
colleagues
mean,
and
he
with
was
support from other Democrat
definitely.
colleagues. I think it's much more important than we think. And to the
Where was
gentleman from
he?
Wisconsin's point
I
about
don't remember
reports,
him in the break
I'm no
room where
fan
they
of
were all
our
huddled in the
frequent
whatever room.
go to the floor and offer some reports as basically cover for
Who was
doing
he?
something. Okay. I'm not a big fan of that. In the context of very specific purposes to ensure oversight on executive branch
Hopefully a
in
prisoner.
protection of civil liberties and our constitutional
Hopefully.
rights, regardless of one's political views.
I mean, I don't want him to.
It's hard
I
to
don't
be
want anyone to go to jail who didn't actually do
forcing
anything.
reports
So
out
it's
of the
not like,
executive
oh, I know
branch for
I'm
how
throwing
they're
you in
carrying
jail.
out their authority,
It's just like
particularly in this
all this
context,
shit has to come out.
particularly where the broad
The-
authorities of the executive branch with
truth is
respect
going
to
to set us
foreign
free.
engagement, national security, where
We
there
just
is
have
a
to keep
great deal of
saying it
power in the
calmly
executive
and
branch under the
confidently.
Constitution.
He was
This
binge eating.
is the area where I would say is maybe the most
He took all the
important
Slim Jims.
for
Oh my
critical
God.
congressional oversight.
That's why.
And
That's why
I want to
Nancy
add
only had
another
one.
context to this because I think there's going to be another amendment
I know you do,
coming up
Ted.
shortly
I
that I'm
understand.
offering
I
that requires
understand. Yes.
monthly
Yes,
reporting
Ted.
in my amendment. And
Yes,
there's some
Ted.
debate back and forth about whether
Yes,
that's too
Ted.
burdensome. And we'll talk about that in a
Yes,
minute.
Ted.
But the context here, I think,
Yes, Ted.
matters.
I
We
want
are
the guys who are
putting
still
in our
defrauding
bill
Americans traveling
a
around the country telling
warrant
them
requirement,
bullshit
right,
theories
with
about the
respect to
2020
U.S.
election of all things
persons
being
being queried in a
stolen.
702 database.
Doug Frank, Seth
We are
Kessler,
doing that
Joe
over the
Olson,
objections of the
David
intel
Clements,
community, both
Joe
members
Von
of this body
Pulitzer,
predisposed in
Ted
that direction,
Logan,
as well as the intel organizations themselves.
The rest.
We are doing that
I heard
because
you
we
from
are
Doug Logan
expressing our
lately.
interests as Congress.
For as
that
long
we
as it
put
takes.
that additional
I don't know.
layer of
I don't.
protection in
This
place
is an argument my dad and I used to
to
have.
protect civil liberties. Given the
He
exchange
used to
had
believe that
yesterday with
humans
Senator
had the
Lee and
capacity
FBI
always
Director
to
Christopher
choose
Wray, in
the
which
right
Senator Lee
things
highlighted
and
the
was
extent to
like
which it
always
was
the
reported in the
idealist.
PCLOB
And
reports
I
on
was
civil
always like,
liberties,
Dad,
the extent to which, and I'm quoting,
Dad,
particularly
Dad,
troubling is that the FBI has never once submitted an application
you're
to the
so
FISC
naive.
pursuant
Oh
to
my
section
God.
702F2,
Yeah, I said, I feel like
in which the warrant
there will
requirement
always be a
actually
segment of
applied.
people that want to take advantage of other
That's an actual
people.
problem, where under our
And,
current laws, a warrant
you
requirement
know,
is in
like it's
place,
part of human nature.
and the executive branch is
And
plainly
war is part
ignoring
of
it.
human nature and all that kind of
On
stuff. He
page
really didn't agree with me.
188 of the report
And I don't
that
know
I'm
if I
looking
still
at, which
agree
I've
with him.
asked to
I
be
mean, or if I
submitted to the
agree with him
record by the
now.
PCLOB,
I don't
Without
know.
objection.
Nope. I don't know.
you see in
Hard.
2018, 2019,
Hard based on
2020,
the evidence in
2021,
front
and
of us, isn't it?
2022, a total of 103 examples of cases where the reports to the FISC as required by court orders,
On a positive note, the fact that they're
we
trying to
didn't
change
actually
laws to
have
hide
the warrants being submitted.
lets me
And that's a
conjecture that
problem.
Joe will be reelected.
And
I
so
think he
I
will.
think these reports, like the gentleman
I think
from
it's a long
Kentucky are
time
offering,
until November, and that's okay.
are critically important
But I think
for
it'll be okay.
Congress to assess whether or not the executive branch is following the law. In a
Yeah,
moment,
even it up
I'll
a
be
bit.
offering an
That's
amendment
true.
to make a very narrow
That
section of
Chunky,
the reporting
yes, should make a
requirements.
song about
That
Rudy
is,
belonging in
how
the
many
zoo. That's a
warrants are being
great
offered,
idea. I
how
don't
many
think Chunk
queries have been hitting a
listens to my
database
show,
on US
but if
persons.
anyone wants to
I
let
want
him
that
know,
on a
that'd be
monthly
awesome.
basis. I'll be honest with you, and I'll talk about that more in a minute.
10%
I
of
want it on a
humans
minute-by-minute
pathologically will take
basis.
advantage of others.
That
Yeah,
might
I
be
just feel like that's the case, and
The point here is,
I
The
don't
gentleman yield. The gentleman
want to
yield.
believe
I'll
that
yield, sure.
people are all
I
bad,
just want to say that,
right? Like
as
I
you may
find it
recall,
hard
last
to
time we
do that.
reauthorized the bill, we got rolled by the Intel Committee.
Yeah.
But
And their warrant
right,
requirement was
some people make it
designed
real
not to be
difficult.
enforced.
Correct.
In the bill that we
Not gonna
have
lie.
before us,
I agree.
we have very
Very
good
difficult.
enforcement mechanisms.
And I thank the gentleman for that. And I agree
I'm
that the
appreciating my
enforcement
father's
requirements in this
perspective more
make
and
it
more,
more
however.
likely that they will be followed. But
And
let's
he
just say my
certainly,
trust level is not
you
high.
know, saw
And
a
so
lot of
my
bad people
perspective
in his
here
time.
is that to a degree, we are punting our responsibility
Yeah, Rudy
to
failed to
Article
appear
3.
yesterday.
We
What
are
a
punting our
bitch.
responsibility to the
What a
FISC. And I
bitch.
don't mean that as
And
a,
he was
as a
on his show
negative. I'm
last
just saying,
night.
let me rephrase that to say we are
I didn't watch it
over-relying
yet. I watched only
on
the first
Article
part of it,
3
but
and the
he was on
FISC
his show last
And
night.
I want to
So
increase the reliance on Article
what was the
1,
reason he said
review of what's
he
going
couldn't be
on,
in court?
understanding that the amicus curiae, understanding that
Terrible.
some other provisions we put in there
Yeah,
insert us
that's
more
true.
into it. I want
Very
every
true.
member of
Yeah.
Congress to be able to
Arrest them.
basically have alarm bells going off.
Arrest them
So we'll
all.
get into that
Stop it
amendment in a
with this
minute,
like
but I
selective,
strongly
you know,
support this
going
amendment
after certain
on an
people
annual
and their
basis, providing
bond,
more
but not
granular
others.
detail,
Like,
and I yield
stop
back.
it. I
Gentleman
understand
yields
there's a
back for the
risk
purposes. Gentlelady from Indiana.
to going after
Move
a
to strike the
presidential
last word.
candidate
Gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
judiciously
Thank you.
in
I
terms of what the
appreciate
public
Representative Massey
reaction
doing
would be,
this
but of course
amendment,
that's
and I
not
really
in
like
the
the
calculus.
rationale.
So
Maybe they
we can
don't
just
have
go ahead and
that,
fucking do it.
much time then
We need to
to
set some
harass
precedents.
Americans. So I really like
Oh,
that. I think one thing, and I will address one in my
this
amendment a little bit later on.
cow. I
We have
hate
a
this
lot of
bitch.
reporting, which is
I don't
great, but we really
know.
don't have a system
I
for
gotta
us
look
to
at
look
that.
at these
I'll look at that
reports, and it's
during
very
the
hard
break.
to
I'll
find
look
these
at that.
reports and take action. So we also need to think
So
about
what
it,
is she finding
how
to
we
be
cannot
angry
just
about
look
this?
once every 5
I would
years
love to
at
know
these
this.
reports when we do reauthorization, but how we can have more timely responses and set up Congress to deal with this. So I think it's very important to have
What? Every
a
5 years?
separate person also doing this report, but we need to think, and maybe these people we should have a specific hearings where these reports will be discussed and presented.
I
and
thought
we
the
can do that,
governor
but maybe we need to
appointed
start
them.
mandated some of these hearings, which will force us to look at these
And
reports,
then they
because
had to
if
run
you
a
look
special
at
election.
look at the
But I could be wrong
PCLB
about that. It might
report,
be a special
it is
election.
very alarming that a
What are they
lot of
doing for Diane?
recommendations
Did
and a lot of
appoint someone to
conclusions as
that?
they reach by
Yeah, he
reviewing
appointed
this
someone.
and how many rights of
So I
Americans
think he
being
appointed.
violated. We turn into
Oh,
surveillance
she's
state. So I am
terrible.
very much
She's really like
supportive of
just an
this. I think
objectively
it's very
horrible
good to
person.
have additional
Yeah,
reports
special
and
election.
hopefully
That's
it will
fantastic.
force some of the
Oh, I think I need to take a trip to Bakersfield
people in
and
intelligence
help
community
people
to think
register to vote.
twice maybe before
Maybe
they
the Dino
decide
needs
to
to
do
go to
these
the Central
queries, because
Valley.
they decide to
Spend a
do these
little time
procedures
in
because they've been taken
Bakersfield.
very
I will
lightly
definitely
and
look
been
that up,
abused
though. Thanks.
significantly.
That's a good idea.
And I think, this,
Hey,
we are
man, we're
turning
going to
into being
Bakersfield.
a police and surveillance state, which is very, very
Maybe we'll stop
dangerous.
and see Oreo
And I
on the
am very
way.
happy to see we have a support on the bipartisan basis, because this issue shouldn't be partisan. We
Clovis.
have a lot of partisan issues,
No,
but I
I would
appreciate that
not go out of my way for
actually
that.
people on the left and on the right can agree on some issues. And, and we
No,
don't have
okay,
to go
don't get-
very far in amendments. We actually can agree on the force. So
Shut up,
I
bitch.
strongly support this amendment.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Can't stand her.
I just like to add that the importance of reports is not just who might read them, but their influence on those who write them.
What?
It's a reminder that there is oversight, however imperfect.
Oh, it is?
And it puts
Oh,
them
it
on
is the
notice that
same?
at any given time, that agency
fill a
may
house
be
seat?
called to
Interesting.
account for the activities that it is reporting.
He
That is a
appointed
very
fines.
good
Well,
thing.
she was a senator.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with you, and I yield back.
I know it is pretty red, but we could do it.
Does anyone seek
I think
recognition?
the Dino should at least
Question occurs on the amendment
give it a
from the
shot.
gentleman from Kentucky. All those in favor say aye.
I like
All those
them. I like
opposed,
the
no.
Central Valley. I
In
spent
the
a lot
chair,
of
the
time
ayes
there
have it.
when I was
The
younger.
amendment is adopted.
Not Bakersfield, but,
Who
you know.
seeks recognition?
Some
Gentleman from
places.
Texas.
Oh, hold on just a moment, please.
I have an amendment at the
I'm
desk.
going to mute and see if it
Report.
works, but let me know if you can't hear the
Amendment to the
broadcast.
amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR
Without
6570.
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Arizona reserves a point of order, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the chairman. And I may not need to use the entire 5 minutes because I laid the foundation in the context of the previous amendment, which I wholly support. That amendment has a much more granular and more detailed requirement of information that is required to be presented to Congress on an annual basis. That is a very good thing. Allows us to analyze what's actually happening.
Are you guys comfortable?
The one thing that I think is important here is, while I agree with what the ranking member said about the civil penalties and the criminal penalties being in this bill and other provisions that are likely to encourage a greater adherence to the requirements, which have been ignored, right? As I pointed out in the exchange between Senator Mike Lee and Christopher Wray yesterday over in the Senate, literal warrant requirements being just blatantly ignored. My concern here is, depending on what happens here and in the Intel Committee and the floor in the Senate, with 12-333 in executive orders, with the possibility always of a rubber stamping of warrants, which could end up being the case, or the ignoring of the requirements in some form or fashion. We don't know how our best efforts here will play out, right? We're drafting something that likely we won't readdress for another 5 years. There's a reason we're doing this right now. It's because we have to. And so my point is, and I was trying to allude to it before, we in Congress need to be more actively engaged in this particular question, because it's a fundamental duty for us to check the executive branch. And I understand there's provisions in here, like I said, with the amicus curiae. There's provisions, for us to have two members, at the designation of the chairman in the room as needed, and staff. That's good. But we know how this place works. We know how this town works. We know how busy everybody gets. We know how busy members are. Staff who end up in the room can often end up getting sucked into the vortex of the mood in the room to go after bad actors and to say, you want to go do this, right? Those of us who've been prosecutors have seen that, where you get into that mentality. All I want here is a minimal amount of information on a more regular basis. Like I said, I'd like to have my phone chime every single time a U.S. query is made, right? And I can go, why the hell is that going on? Now, that's a little absurd. That might be a little much. I guess my point is, psychologically speaking, that's where my head is. So to me, a monthly report on this very minimal subset of information about whether warrants have been, carried out, or whether or not, the number of queries, is just a way that, we get it in January or February or March. We're just not waiting for an annual basis to say, hey, what in the hell are you guys doing? Right? Are you implementing this? And I know there's going to be some pushback on the burden.
Sorry about that.
I mean, come on. They're going to be
Let's
collecting
see,
the data and report it annually.
Oh my
I think
God,
having
Val.
that same staffer
I wish
who's
you
going around
were.
collecting it, going around to the U.S. courts and
do it,
talking to the
girl.
FISC judges and whatever,
Come on out.
however that will happen,
I'll meet you
we
halfway.
can all figure that out.
Joe,
You
sure.
collect the
could speak
information
any
and then you
moment
report it to us on a
on
monthly
Ukraine
basis.
funding.
And then our staffers in the
You
room
missed a lot of
and
us
our
talking
appointed
about
members in the room now have more information. And frankly, we, the general members,
can't remember.
now have at least a monthly check without, with all due
Due to
respect,
speak,
having to rely on the appointed 2 members or
The press
staffers.
secretary, I want to.
We have control as the
yes, Jose
435 members of
Andres.
Congress,
Oh,
see that
God, I
report
love him.
and be able to exercise
World
our
Kitchen,
duties
what a
on that. And I'll
great,
yield to the ranking member who had a question.
what
Or
a
a point.
wonderful
Thank you. I just
organization
want to
that is.
say, I think monthly reports are impractical. You want to rein in the FBI, not
monthly
tie
is
its hands to
bullshit.
red tape. I
Fuck
worry
that.
this amendment would tip the scales away from practical reforms, but
You
I
can do
understand
interim reports
the
of
desire for more
urgent
information. Would
situations.
you consider making this a quarterly report?
Christ.
Quarterly
I
report
mean,
I could support.
I would prefer it be
Monthly
monthly.
is dumb. You're dumb
Because
then.
I don't, because
You're
like I said,
dumb.
my
Then you
position
don't
was
know
I
how
would
people
prefer
work.
it be instantaneous.
And you don't know how actual work
Because
works.
again, I don't
Because you're going to
generally
increase the
trust
cost
Every
having
month,
someone
could
doing
you
monitoring
accept
every
quarterly?
fucking
If
month.
I could certainly
Oh my
be
God.
willing to accept the
Stupid.
friendly goal and comedy of achieving quarterly, if it would be
Yes.
received.
Then do an interim.
But I do want to at least stipulate I will be proven correct that we would be better off if we were getting it more
I love
often than
everybody.
quarterly, and that the bureaucratic demands on the staffer to collect it
I
is
will
not
rip
that
everybody.
significant.
So I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be amended to say quarterly.
Yeah,
Without objection?
do it.
The amendment is so amended.
Perfect.
I would just, the gentleman yields
God,
back.
the entire staff.
I would just point out that
breathed
the
this huge
gentleman's
sigh of
statement, he
relief.
said a more regular basis and more detailed information. Mr.
Congressman,
Nadler's
have you ever
amendment
had a
and your,
job?
they cover
Have you
that.
ever
So
had
we've
to
got the more
generate any
detailed
reporting
basis
in
from
your
the
life
previous amendment,
whatsoever? Because it's a
more regular
fucking
basis
full-time
and this
job as it
amendment.
is.
And we are continuing our
I did
bipartisan
monthly reporting. It
march
was
forward on this
practically
legislation. The
30%
amendment
of
is
my
agreed
job was
to.
just
Well, let me
tracking
bring it
data.
up. Anyone else wish to
The
speak on the
amendment,
amendment?
is
Huge
agreed
waste of
to.
time.
The question occurs on the amendment to on the amendment as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And the amended amendment is agreed to. The chair now recognizes. We don't have to do that. We can just-
Who are you going to recognize now? Who? Who, sir? Who's left? Nadler just gave Roy a concession, and he walked away. Oh, well, bum, bum, bum. Wait, what happened? Did I miss something? Or is anyone
Gentlelady
talking?
from
Okay, good.
Wyoming.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
No.
Would the gentlelady just suspend for just a second? The
Yeah,
chair-
just shut
chair
up.
Recognize the ranking member for
Sorry.
quite a portion of privilege, I think.
Thank
And
you.
one of those modes.
My colleague Zoe Lofgren has been cited repeatedly here today as a leader in this, as she has been for many years. I just want to note that her absence is because she couldn't be here today because she has COVID, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We wish Ms. Lofgren the speedy recovery. And again, like everyone said, we appreciate her work on this issue for so many years. Gentlelady is recognized. She has an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HR 6570 offered by Ms. Hageman of Wyoming.
The point of order from the gentleman from Arizona. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized for to speak on her amendment.
Thank you. The amendment that I am proposing as currently drafted would amend 50 U.S.C. 1871, which requires the Attorney General to report to the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees of the House and Senate on a semi-annual basis on persons targeted by FISA Title I surveillance orders. The The amendment strengthens this reporting to curb past abuses by requiring the AG to disclose the identity of any person who is targeted, who is associated with a candidate for president of a major party. And it also adds the Speaker and Minority Leader of the House and Majority and Minority Leader of the Senate as report recipients. The intention of this amendment is to deter future abuse and provide for oversight into the process. Current reporting requirements do not inform Congress when the intelligence community
go home,
issues
dies here, and
FISA
pierces
against
nipples.
campaign
It'll be
staff.
fine.
Not only
It'll be
would
fine.
Congress now receive this
Everything's fine.
information, but it would likely detour the FBI from opening an unwarranted case against an American based on their political affiliation, because the agency would have to alert some of the highest elected members of that person's party. The heads of each party would be able to watch over their people to prevent abuse. In 2019, the DOJ Inspector General reported on the abuses and missteps in the FISA orders obtained for Crossfire Hurricane, finding 17 significant errors or omissions and 51 wrong or unsupported factual assertions in the applications that allowed Carter Page to be illegally surveilled for 11 months.
Oh my God.
These findings were confirmed in the Durham
Carter Page
report
is a
this committee
moron.
received testimony on earlier this year,
And
and also
probably
found that political and
should have been
confirmation
surveilled
bias
'cause he
led the
acted
FBI
like
to
a
lie to
moron
the
when
FISC in
asked
order to
about it.
improperly spy on a president's campaign.
Flynn,
Abuses
Flynn,
of FISA
Flynn,
have made their way into
Flynn,
our electoral
Flynn,
system,
Flynn,
and every member on this diet and in this body should be concerned about federal law enforcement's and the intelligence community's proven ability to interfere in our election process.
No, I
These
don't.
abuses could happen to any party, candidate or campaign staffer, depending on influences within the FBI versus domestic political movements. My amendment seeks to serve as a deterrent to these abuses in the future by injecting transparency in the process.
Sink your
If there was
boat.
a desire to seek a FISA order
might
against
go
an
Flynn,
American
just let
affiliated with
me
a
in. I
political
want to
campaign
talk to
for
you.
nefarious reasons, the FBI would
Who
need to
told on
decide its
us?
commitment to such an effort
I
if it
might
had to
go
report
Flynn,
the
just let me
investigations
in.
to some of the highest elected party
where
leaders
we
in our
still
system
want
of government.
Oh, you.
If such an order was sought and granted, congressional leaders would be made aware that the candidate
That's the
running for
Flynn
president
limerick.
as a member of their
There
party
once was a
was being
man named Mike
surveilled.
Flynn.
Such oversight can lead to corrective action. At the same time, congressional leaders of the opposing party would also be notified that the federal government is surveilling their
The
political
heart of a
opposition,
saint.
hopefully giving
Wait,
them
no.
pause about allowing
A
government
saint he thought
surveillance
he
of their
had within.
opponents as that they would be aware of going forward.
But it turned out
Mr. Chairman, this is a great bill, and it will make meaningful reform to protect
was
the
wrong.
constitutionally secured rights of our constituents, including reforms to address the shortcomings
that
and
was
illegal
Putin's
action
short
revealed in the
dong.
IG and Durham reports. The expansion of the amicus
And
into sensitive investigative matters is a step in the right direction to address
he
some of these past
never was heard from
abuses.
again.
My amendment seeks to
That's
take
it.
this reform one step further by strengthening reporting requirements.
What?
If passed and combined with
Flynn
the other reforms in this
Number
bill,
one.
all Americans
This
who want to
series.
use their First Amendment rights to support political parties and candidates could exercise those rights to the fullest without the fear that
They
this
called him
affiliation
Little
would be
Roger
the basis for
Stone.
government
He
surveillance.
never liked to be
With
alone.
all that said, I also understand the balance that
He
has
said,
been struck
"Pardon
on this
me,
particular bill. So I will
I
withdraw
brought
my
you some
amendment,
tea."
but hope that we can continue to pursue much needed FISA and Section 702 reform in the future. Thank you.
Without objection, the
Don't
amendment is
stand
withdrawn.
near
We
that
appreciate the
window too
lady's
long.
comments on the bill and her amendment. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparks.
I have amendment at the desk.
Sorry.
The lady
He had lived
designate,
a life of
gentlelady
sin.
designate her amendment.
I don't even remember what I sang. Thank you, Badger. Okay, let's do another one.
Audit one? Okay. As long as the
Oh,
clerk has
poor
it, we can
old
the clerk.
Alex Jones.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to
He
HR
found he didn't have
6570
enough
offered by
stones.
Mrs. Sparts of Indiana.
Without objection, the amendment
He-
considers read. The gentlelady's point of,
He lied all day
While you're
long.
waiting for the
The
copy
gentlelady's
of the
recognized.
amendment,
At
I'm
night.
going to create this. It's a very simple amendment. So what
Oh,
it
Jesus.
does, so I think we're rightly adding annual audit of FISA compliance by Inspector General because we do need
Threw me
to
off,
have
lady, and I don't
more
like it.
independent eyes on
It's
the
on my Alex
processes because
Jones
there are
limerick.
a lot of audits are done by,
It's not
you know,
awesome.
self-reporting by
So-
Department of Justice, a lot of audits that The FISC does is they're kind of ad hoc. So I think it's important for us to have
Once was a
Inspector
terrible
General
day
doing audits. So it's
by
a
the
very
name
good
of
part of the bill that we
Dr.
do on page
Douglas Frank.
29. So what I really have seen in a lot
He
of
flew
ways, we do
about,
it a lot of these
wait,
audits,
no,
but they never
he
really
flew all
reviewed
around
and presented when we have
and
oversight hearings and never
lied like a
discussed. So it's that
clown.
we have reporting for the sake of reporting, not action.
And I
So what
hope
it
in his
does, it
brain he
says
will drown.
when we have Attorney General come in our oversight hearing and talking about oversight
not good,
of
but they're fun.
the Department of Justice is doing, including oversight of FBI and all of the other things it's supposed
And
to do.
limericks are
They
supposed to be
also
dirty, so don't
should
think that we're
discuss this Inspector General audit report and see what was done and what it's done. But it's important for us to bring attention because it is
the
very
art form.
material issue that we'll actually have a discussion of this during our oversight hearing with Attorney General. And this Inspector General report I actually looked at by the executive branch, and remediation or other actions reported are happening, and they can talk to us about that. So it's a very simple amendment. All it just says, and when Attorney General comes to oversight hearing in the House and the Senate, Attorney General shall discuss this Inspector General report on annual audit of FISA.
Gentlelady yields back. Does gentleman insist on his point of order? Gentleman withdraws. The chair recognizes.
That's
recognize the
Miss
ranking
Arts from
Thank you.
somewhere in the Midwest.
There's
She from
already,
Indiana or
I oppose the
something?
amendment is
She's
unnecessary.
from the
basically.
Ukraine
There's already
originally,
a
but
reporting
very
requirement.
anti-Ukraine support.
The Attorney General
Um,
already comes
so she's been very
annually to
vocal
the
about that.
judiciary committees, and if
And she's
he's
just kind of
required to
generally
report this
seems
anyway,
like
and
an
if he doesn't
asshole,
report it adequately, he can ask
to
for
be
a question.
honest.
So I just think it's
I'm sure she has her
unnecessary.
soft side, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, but it's not in the
How did you
statute
know?
that Attorney General
Oh,
shall
India?
actually. So I want to make sure that when the Attorney General comes here,
Look
he or
at
she is
me.
prepared to actually do that. Because
That's
if it is
right.
in the
I got
code
it right. I
and the part
pulled
of the
that right
hearing,
out of
Attorney
my
General's
head.
will be discussed, we have more meaningful discussions because they will
hi,
have to be
Mike.
referring to
I'm
this
still not
report that
high
they
enough.
should be
I'm not
reviewing.
high enough.
Otherwise, Attorney General will sit in this committee and say, well, I'll get back, I'll do this, and it never happens. So
Reclaiming my
that's
time.
why it's
Reclaiming-
important for them to be familiar with that report.
Reclaiming my time.
With anybody that we don't like.
It'd be improper for Congress
I think she
to mandate
hangs
that
with
the
people we
committee
don't like. I
hold
don't
a
know.
hearing on a particular subject.
No,
I normally do anyway.
There's some
General,
amazing
you-
amount of
this is
people
not
who
a
do hang
committee.
with
We're
Proud
gonna-
Boys.
Controls the time.
I've
But-
gotten some
but
weird.
That's what it would do. I'll yield.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Well, this is actually not, we already have oversight hearing. All it says, it's not new hearing, it's nothing required. We already have an Attorney General doing the hearing. So as a part of the hearing, Attorney General should, discuss this Inspector General report. So he needs to say, based on my assessment, so that we need to make sure that Attorney General is looking at this report and addressing with Congress, because ultimately, if we want to do oversight functions, we need to make sure that somebody's taking actions. So all it says that they need to discuss already, it doesn't require any hearing.
Reclaiming my time.
Well, this is my time. I was
No, it's still,
No,
it's
it's
still Mr.
not.
Nadler's time.
Okay, then,
You idiot.
Let me just say.
Learn the Constitution. Or no,
Attorney
wait,
General
Robert's
comes
Rules of
before the
Order?
committee every year.
Or what is it? Is it Robert's Rules of Order?
If he doesn't
No.
discuss this, we can always
Parliamentary.
ask some questions about
She's
it. I
not
just don't see
lovely.
what the point of this
She
amendment
has
is.
never shown herself to
We're
be
putting
lovely.
into statute something that happens.
She saves that for
if
family.
it doesn't happen, we ask the questions. He's got to be prepared for it.
The gentleman yield.
I'll yield to the chairman.
I appreciate the ranking member, and I appreciate the gentlelady from Indiana. And
dumbass
I know the
exchange.
objectives she wants, but I do think the ranking member makes a good point. The IG is already obligated to come to give us information. We just adopted 2 amendments that said he has to do that now.
What's NOC?
Excuse me. We have to get that information on a quarterly basis, and the information that comes to us has to be more detailed, more of what we want to see. The Attorney General does come. I think the Attorney General is going to be on notice that the Judiciary Committee wants to
I think
ask
he is.
him or her,
Really.
whoever that happens to be at the time, whoever the Attorney General is, questions about the FISA law and how it works. When we have him next year, I'll I'll even.
Oh, non-official cover.
We can write the letter. I bet Mr. Nadler would sign it.
Yep.
We'll make it a letter from Ms. Sparks, the gentlelady from Indiana, saying, when you come, Mr. Attorney General, be ready to answer
Yeah.
these questions
There you go.
on
Make her come up with the
FISA
question.
and on 702, whatever we want to, but we can put him on notice. He better be prepared so he doesn't get what you and I have all experienced, where he says, oh, I'll have to get back with you. So I appreciate
Open up a
what the lady's
FISA
doing.
on
I
her.
don't necessarily think that the amendment is
I don't know.
necessary.
I
With that, I
just,
yield
I
back to the
don't,
ranking member.
I just kind
I'll
of like
just say I
with
agree.
her and Santos and
just
Hagman to
unnecessary
some
to put it
degree,
into
although she's been
statute.
around a while in politics
And
in Colorado or
we
Wyoming.
should every year ask the
I
Attorney
just
General
wonder,
before he
and
comes in to
Luna,
be
you
prepared
know,
to
I
talk
kind of wonder, what are voters
about
actually
FISA
thinking
and
about these
702?
people and their
I'm sure we
ability
will.
to
I yield back.
represent them?
Anyone seek, who seeks
I'm
recognition
sure
on the
it is too.
amendment? The question occurs
She
on
doesn't
the
give you a
amendment from
lot
the
of
gentlelady
reason
from
not to doubt
Indiana.
her
All those in favor say
intentions.
aye.
I'm sorry.
All those opposed,
Be
no.
open about her
Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The
disdain
amendment is not adopted.
or her
Anyone else seek
embrace of
recognition on?
propaganda. She's really good
Okay,
at
you're very nice. I appreciate it, Victoria. Okay.
Are we all gonna go like get our nails done after this? No, we won't be. Okay. Just wanted to know. I thought we were all gonna braid each other's hair.
Who does? The gentlelady from Pennsylvania wishes to speak on the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and
And move to
gentlelady's
strike the
recognized.
last word.
Strike the last word.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say that I'm really heartened by what has gone on here over the course of many years, but also recent weeks, a coming together in this
That's
committee
true.
over
That's
something
true.
extremely important.
I mean,
I rise in support of HR 6570, the Protect Liberty
Wow,
and Endless
yeah,
Warrant Surveillance
I
Act,
see it a lot.
reforming the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance
a
Act, known as FISA. As lawmakers and members of the Judiciary Committee, it's our job to strike the right balance between often competing interests. Today, we must safeguard both our national security as well as our constitutional rights of privacy. When you take a look at the history and what has been learned through the reporting, that in 2021, for example, the FBI made nearly 3.4 million queries of U.S. persons.
See,
It's
Madeline
stunning
wishes
and
she was
shocking.
in her
And yes,
hoodie.
while they have recognized it
Congress should
and
have
have made
hoodies
some reforms on
so
their
they can
own,
have
it
hoodie
is
day.
our job to make sure we hold them
I
to a
think
far
our
greater
world would be a
standard
lot
as they protect
cooler
our
if
national
we had
security.
a hoodie day.
I'm encouraged that so many members on both
You don't
sides
have to wear a hoodie,
of this
but
hearing room
I would
take this
strongly
responsibility
suggest it.
seriously when it comes to FISA Section 702. Appalling overuse of this powerful tool, which went unchecked and unaudited for too long, must stop. The warrant requirement and other key provisions at the heart of this bipartisan bill will leave American civil rights better defended, as we still allow the agencies to do the important work of keeping us safe. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of these essential reforms, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Anyone else seek recognition on? The question is on the adoption of the amendment in the
Everyone
nature of a
looks
substitute as amended. This will be
Right.
followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Reporting quorum being present, the question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. Again, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. The sponsor of the legislation, the
Yes,
subcommittee
whatever.
chair with jurisdiction, asks for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Isa? Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes yes. Mr. Biggs?
Ken and
Mr. Biggs
Daryl.
votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes
Look
aye.
out.
Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes aye. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy?
Massey is pooping.
Mr. Roy votes aye.
Mr. Roy
Mr.
is
Bishop?
there, though.
Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Sparts? Ms. Sparts votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald?
God.
Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes yes. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Gooden. Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Nels. Mr. Moore votes aye. Mr. Kiley votes aye.
They're
Ms.
all
Hageman. Ms.
gone.
Hageman votes aye. Mr.
They're
Moran.
all gone.
Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Hunt votes aye. Mr. Fry. Mr. Nadler.
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson Lee.
What?
Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson.
Where are you?
Mr. Schiff.
A lot of pooping going on in there. I just
Mr. Swallow.
voting. I
Mr.
guess.
Swallow votes no. Mr. Liu.
Oh,
Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Mr. Nagoose. Ms. McBath. Ms. McBath votes aye. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy.
Aye.
Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant. Mr. Isa votes aye. Mr. Gooden votes aye. Mr. Nels votes yes. Mr. Liu votes aye.
Mr. Weir yelling from the
Mr. Cohen
doorway
votes aye.
because there's an
Mr. Fry, you're not
all-you-can-eat
recorded.
buffet on
Mr.
Capitol
Fry
Hill.
votes aye.
I know we have a few more members trying to get back, but I want to thank those who were here and participated in the debate and the discussions over the last
And I'm
few
going to
months.
be
Thank you
leaving
again.
now.
This is,
Goodbye.
I think, a very good product that we expect to be on the House floor.
Okay. Well,
next
I think
week.
they're going to vote it into committee.
We're going to hold the roll open to make sure
Congratulations,
anyone who wants to come
everybody.
back and vote.
Blar, blar, blar.
from particularly the Transportation Committee can.
Thanks. Thanks, Jimmy Jordan. Jimmy on my mind. Okay. Hi, everyone. So here's the plan. I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and I will come back at definitely, I have a stream set for what time? Shit. I hope I did it right. God, sometimes I don't do things right. Anyway, there's another stream set for a little bit later this afternoon. It's right before, excuse me. There's another stream set for today at 11:55, which is 2:55 Eastern, 11:55 Pacific, all in between and outside of those. And we will be watching the Colorado Supreme Court hearing that's going to be streamed on here, and that is where the appeal is being made by Crew to the Colorado State Supreme Court to keep Trump off the ballot. So that is something we're going to watch together, and then hopefully, perhaps right after that, we'll just have to see how long everything goes. But I also really want to go through the Eastman brief that was submitted by the state bar lawyers against John Eastman that kind of summarizes their entire case against him. And it is a fantastic read. Now, last night, I lost all my annotations when I was in the middle of it, so I went to bed. But it doesn't matter. And I'm grateful to Oomph, who also reviewed it last night, made some annotations, made a great thread. So we'll use his thread as kind of a guidepost and then go through the document pretty finely. So it'll take a while. I think it'll be a longer stream in that regard. There is the the Republican debate tonight. I'm not tempted to stream it. It's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Of the ridiculous. It's the 4 horse people of the ridiculous. That's who's left. The 4 horse people of the ridiculous. And so I'm tempted not to stream that, but we'll just kind of have to see how it goes, I guess. Anyway, big day. Wow, getting busy here in the justice streamy world. All right. So thank you again for coming this morning, and I look forward to seeing you later on. If something happens in between, then I'll come on. But I apologize for like messing up hearings and the usual apologies that I have for you. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Okay, everyone. I will see you later.